together.
Oh my god.
I need to go to the bathroom though.
Look at the amount I'm sweating. I'm fucking boiling. Oh my god.
Oh my. This should be the intro for the episode.
Look at me, man. My fucking back, man. What?
I didn't even notice.
Oh my,
my
god.
lord.
I'm sweating buckets. I can feel it, man, but I don't quite.
Oh my god.
I'm going to change my t-shirt.
I lost my earphones. 3, 2, 1. Last week we spoke about Chrissy Teigen for a little bit, Lewis, and the accountability that she might face because of the tweets that she had. Was it to a model? Was it?
Yeah, to Courtney. That's right, to Courtney
Stoddard. Yeah, that's right. And we weren't sure the sort of long-term or short-term backlash that she was going to face.
We reckon she'd probably deserve something, though, right?
Yeah, well, I seen this week she was on Jimmy Fallon.
Okay. So she's probably doing just fine.
Yeah, it was like her and John Legend and a bunch of other celebrities were doing charades on Jimmy Fallon, so it can't have been that bad.
Fuck me. God damn these people. Goddamn ivory towers.
Yeah, I think these celebrities just like live in a different world, you know?
Yeah.
The amount they can get away with is just different.
Well, it comes back to what we said last episode. I guess her fan base and following and support from her sponsors was enough to fight this particular case of cancel culture off. She was just one of the ones where the equation tipped in her favour. So fucking good for her.
Yeah. So if you didn't know, this is Guide to the 21st Century, a conversational podcast between two friends, Lewis and I, discussing topical issues and trying to navigate the minefield that is life in the 21st century.
Each week, Scott and I have been thinking of a topic that's been in our minds, and we've been bringing that to the show. Then when we're on the show, we'll break down our topics, disseminate our views, and together we try to reach some new conclusion that we maybe wouldn't have reached on our own.
Yeah, so this week, I've been sort of thinking about a topic that means quite a lot to me in general. And I was kind of thinking that we can't really have a guide for the 21st century without talking about the cultural phenomenon that was that is Harry Potter.
Sure.
And I think that you and I are like two sides of a coin on this franchise. Well, I wouldn't say two sides of a coin actually. Maybe because I love Harry Potter, but you don't like it quite as much.
I don't know what the opposite of the coin that you're on is, but I imagine it's... I have a relatively standard view for people our age of it. I think you love Harry Potter, though.
I think a lot of people agree with me as well. What do you think it is about Harry Potter that resonates with people? Because from my point of view, looking in, the story of Harry Potter isn't exactly unique. You think about what it is, right?
Sure.
It's a strange, deprived, like loner kid who thinks he's kind of got something different. He thinks he's like destined for something like greater. He thinks his life isn't what it should be, sort of thing. And then it turns out he's got this magical power within him. He leaves the world that he lived in for an entirely new world where he becomes this like really famous, really competent wizard with like loads of friends who goes on to attempt to vanquish a great evil. We could be talking about Star Wars. We could be talking about The Matrix.
Yeah.
There are so many franchises that have this story. What is it about Harry Potter that people like?
Well, you're right. What you said is there. It's the classic trope, isn't it? Normal, ordinary boy that has like a shitty home life, and he's like, just like a normal guy. Person that you can see your shoes in. Turns out they're special. Not only they're special, they're the chosen one. That's just a perfect formula right there. But I think for you and me, and a lot of people our age particularly, it's like we saw it at the right time. We were like a couple years younger than Harry in the movies as each movie was coming out, and I'm sure you'll agree that like one of the best things about for me for the movies was that as we matured, so did the movies. And we saw the cast grow up, and there was like this affiliation. They're going through high school, we're going through high school. They're like forming their first relationships and breaking them, and it was like a mirror for us. So you're right, it's weird. Standard story, but just amplified in a huge way for us, I think.
I think a lot of it maybe has to do with the world building around these things, because you think about these super mega franchises and like the story, like I say, isn't special, it isn't unique, it's a classic, but the world around the story sort of makes the atmosphere, if you know what I mean. The fans sort of resonate with the world around them. They don't always necessarily resonate with characters. In Star Wars there is like Darth Vader, but that he was kind of an anomaly in terms of antagonist. But in general it's more about the world building, right? It's not really the main character that's appealing, because I don't think it's Harry people like.
You're right actually. Harry, it's almost yeah, there's something weird. It's as if like Harry isn't actually the main character. The main character is just like the school itself, like the whole concept of this place and the different houses. Because I hadn't I hadn't actually thought about that myself, but I suppose there's something that's like I'm sure when like you were a kid, you would have like, and I know I certainly did. I would have given anything to like live in that world. You know, it's like it's like maybe I'm a fucking wizard. You know, maybe I'm a good Hogwarts type of thing.
Maybe I'll get my letter when I'm 11. You know.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's definitely something to be said that the world is like, I guess, quite believable in some aspects. The idea of a hidden world, that's something that people love, and it's like it's happened in a lot of other. The thing I don't understand about Harry Potter is that I don't think it's a particularly unique idea. I don't even think it's a particularly exceptional execution, to be honest with you. But it's very much came to the world at the right time, and the correct film studio picked it up, and then it just like created its own momentum from there. J K Rowling's undoubtedly, she's really talented, but I think it was kind of like lightning in a bottle. The Harry Potter
Sure.
franchise. I think there's something special to it, and it was for us. That's even magnified just by the fact that it came out at the absolutely perfect time in order for us to get maximum appreciation. As the concepts got more complex, we got intelligent enough to understand what the thoughts that even were going on, and as like these troubles, like the bit, like as like the world started sitting on Harry's shoulders, and he started aging up a bit and realizing his place in the world. We're starting to understand our place in the world. So I guess you're right. There's something to do with the world that's just you yearn to be there, don't you?
One of the things about it that's interesting to me as well is that Harry Potter seems to appeal to a mix of men and women, which, and I have no evidence for this conclusion that I've drawn at all,
Okay.
but that seems unusual to me because a lot of these franchises that are like, fantasy franchises, like I talk about Star Wars and The Matrix, the fan bases for that seem to be predominantly male in my experience, but Harry Potter seems to have like a mixture of male and female audiences,
Hmm.
which I don't really understand. And like I say, I've no evidence for that,
Good point.
but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. I mean,
strange.
yeah, you're right there. I guess I've never before felt a particular gender bias for the books. That could just be due to the amount of equal representation in the books, right? I know Harry's the main character, and like there's a lot of you probably spend more time in like the boys' dorm than you ever do in the girls' dorm. So I think there's definitely looking back more male characters, especially when it comes to the professors. But
I think there are no scenes in the girls' dorm because Harry can't get there actually. So like,
right,
there's
really,
no
okay,
like he just never go there in the books.
yeah, okay. So maybe the representation isn't brilliant, but I feel it does a good job. It's not like a boys' book at all, you know.
No, it's not. But outside of like Hermione, there's no real female leads, right? You got Harry, you got Dumbledore,
Jenny,
you got Voldemort, Snape, Jenny's High's love interest. Like
yeah. Oh,
she's
sure.
not even her own character. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
don't fucking say that. That's not true. I don't believe that she's there for Harry. She's she's just in person. This is just important as Percy.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Jenny's my favorite character in the whole franchise, but
Uh-huh.
I think she is Harry's like love interest, but first
I
and
suppose
foremost,
so.
you know what
I
I mean?
suppose so. Yeah.
Yeah. So just kind of to go through the films, I think there's like a lot of things that I've been thinking about when I've went away and thought about Harry Potter more critically, because I've always
Sure.
viewed it as a
Mm.
fan, and now I'm kind of looking at it from the outside in, and I'm thinking to myself, what does this movie do to make people happy, and what does it do to make them not happy?
Okay.
So you kind of start off with the first film, and you've got this, like we talk about, this loner kid. He's unspecial, totally normal in every way, and then his life kind of gets flipped upside down one day when this giant comes in and explains to him that he's actually a wizard and he has
Hmm.
all these like special powers. And one of the things that I found that throughout the franchise, Harry becomes like annoyingly relatable
Okay.
in almost every aspect, because
Yes.
it's
Yes.
like it's so relatable that you live in like this normal life where like nothing is like special to you, especially as like a teenager. It's kind of like all everything's just like normal, and you're kind of
Hmm.
like imagining scenarios in which you'd be like good at things,
Hmm. Hmm.
if you're in school, you're imagining being good at subjects, you're imagining having a girlfriend, you're imagining all these things that could be better in your life, and
And Harry's doing the
all of
same.
a sudden someone just swoops into his life and tells him that all these things are in fact true.
Right. Okay. Uh huh.
So he learns that his life is like full of like meaning and adversity as well, because his parents are like murdered when he's a child, but as far as he's concerned, they died in a car crash. And then this
Hmm.
guy turns around and tells him, no, actually, the most powerful dark wizard of all time actually, killed your parents. So immediately the story like gives pain in his life meaning as well. which I thought was like super interesting because that's something that people seek out, right? They look at pain in their life and they it kind of happens for no reason sometimes, and people try and like attach meaning to those things, and it's kind of like it's thrust upon Harry like almost like straight away.
Yeah, there's also probably something to the idea that like people think that there's like a shining light at the end of the rainbow. It's like Harry's obviously suffered. He's not had a parents. He's had to live this horrible life, and he's like many aspects of his life have been really, really hard. But he has also got the reward. He turns out to be a wizard, and he meets his friends, and he becomes this teenager, and he meets girls and stuff like that. So there's probably this idea of, Harry is like a intrinsically good character. I think when you read the books, that
Yeah,
comes across very clear. He's someone that has like really righteous morals and stuff like that. So there's just something about his character you just really want to do well, and you're right. There in some ways you see yourself in him, as particularly his better traits, and even like the usual teenage boy stuff. I guess it's probably more of a relation for us just because we were actual teenage boys reading about this book, so it would have been super super relatable for us.
yeah. So he ends up going to this special school in Hogwarts, which is a school that's like full of kids that are like special, like sort of special like he is. It's full of
Hmm.
witches and wizards, and it's like this mega famous school. And at this point, without the audience even realizing it, Harry Potter sort of becomes a high school drama, and all of the things that like happen at Hogwarts are like annoyingly relatable when you start to like think about them. He goes to like classes. There's like a bully at his school. There's
Yeah,
like a
the posh
teacher.
kids,
There's like a teacher that he doesn't like, or there's teachers that he does like, and he meets this like mentor figure in like Dumbledore, who's like the most competent wizard of the age, and all of a sudden he's like teaching Harry like when he gets there.
Hmm.
He also has like a couple of friends, and they become like they're like the best friends basically anyone could ask
You could
for
ask for sure. Okay.
in Harry's scenario. So he's got no friends before, and then he comes and then he meets Ron and Hermione, who turn out to be the perfect combination of people that Harry needs in his life to like go on and
Mm,
succeed.
yeah.
Ron's not
Okay.
particularly special, but he comes from like a pure blood wizarding family with wizards all the way back in the generations.
Hmm.
So he has all the common sense of the wizarding world to like, be able to pass that on to Harry. Hermione comes from Harry's world. She's a muggle born,
Exactly.
so no one in her family's magical. She can relate to him like that. She's also a fucking genius.
Literally a genius as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
She can answer all the questions that Ron cannot answer.
the smartest kid in the school. She's got the book smarts to like match Ron's like wisdom in his
Hmm.
family. And
Hmm.
like Harry's sort of like stuck in the middle, just kind of like happy to be there, but like soaking in both sides of this like coin. And we also start to get the first hints of like racism as well, because Hermione's like a muggle born,
Sure.
and the
That's right.
antagonist of the story, which is kind of like Voldemort, the Death Eaters, the evil wizards, they kind of hate Muggleborns. They hate Muggles in general. So we start to see that dynamic straight away, which becomes like a sort of big theme throughout the movie for them as well.
Just the first movie. Are you talking about in
No,
terms of like Mudbloods and stuff?
the
The
whole
whole
time,
series.
yeah. I
Yeah.
guess like
Exactly. Yeah.
that's kind
Because
of
there's also
Voldemort's
like
motivation, yeah.
yeah. There is probably like social welfare because like then eventually like you of course you have like the plight of like the house elves, which are basically a slave class. There are definitely social issues that are in this movie. I think the thing about the first movie is though, as much as you're right that like we learn about Harry and we realize it's like in some ways it's so natural in the way we read about his experience and how he's perceiving the world. um the important thing is that we are reading it from Harry's perspective, and Harry isn't a wizard, so everything he sees, he's seen it for the first time. So like,
Sure.
there's this degree of wonder, and like that's the thing when we read the first book, when we read the first movie, it is like there's wondrous things happening. The first time they go into Diagon Alley, and there's like this entire world sitting behind like a street on London. And it's like that was just like a shock and awe moment, and it was so great for the readers because it was the exact same experience for Harry himself. It was a position in the books where you got all of the like the sightseeing, like the true awe out the way, and it's like so much of that I think is represented in the actual movie itself. Because like we're probably gonna you have read the books many, many times. I've read the books once years ago, so most of my memories, to be honest, come from the movies. But like when it comes to the first movie, there's like just a sense of wonder underlying absolutely everything. Even like the
Yeah.
music and the themes and the tones, and it's just it's like discovery and establishment. So I think the first movie does like such a brilliant job of setting this like fantastical universe underpinned in this realistic high school setting.
Well, especially for like children, because as children are like watching these movies and they're seeing like amazing things, and it doesn't seem like just children like the movies. There seems to be a whole range of people. But
Oh yeah, yeah.
you're right. As they're watching it, as the audience goes, so does Harry. You know,
Right, yeah.
he kind of like mirrors your emotion because he's not used to any of these things. So
Hmm.
maybe that's one of the reasons why males and females can relate to the franchise in general, because it's not really about the fact that Harry's a boy. And in fact, it's like it's films and films down the line before Harry even expresses like sexual interest in like anyone. So
Sure.
it's not really about like his gender for like a long time. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
There's no plot lines about that. It is just like the audience being mirrored by like Harry's reaction, and like everyone around him is like, yeah, this is normal. This is things are brilliant here, and Harry's
Yeah, yeah,
like, what do
exactly.
you mean?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, it is weird. I think in some aspects of it as well. It's like, yeah, it doesn't come across in this book too much, but it's yeah, because you don't they do a good enough job. This J K Rowling does a good enough job in this book of keeping like the wizarding stuff small enough and contained enough that you're like, I can kind of believe that there actually is
Yes.
a veil that exists between these two worlds, and like you are literally in that first book, it is the action of parting the veil, and so it does. I think the first book, the first movie is just brilliantly done.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about when I mentioned this like world building aspect to it, because you're right. Hogwarts seems like a mystical place in the
Yeah, yeah,
first
yeah,
book,
yeah. You're
but
right.
it does seem like a very it seems like it's still a building
Sure.
in the first movie in the first book, if you know what I mean. It's not, it doesn't take things too far. Like by the seventh movie, like Hogwarts is like way
A
beyond
labyrinth. Yeah.
just like a regular place, and there's parts of Hogwarts that no one's even ever explored and that sort of thing.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
In the first one, it does sort of like dip your toe into the atmosphere, but it does so in a way where it shows you Harry, and Harry's also experiencing becoming this extremely competent wizard as well, where he's like the sport there is Quidditch and all. So
Oh, sure,
Harry
that's
gets
right.
on a
Yeah.
broom and he's like the best kid they've ever seen. You know,
Hmm.
he just really happens to be so competent and he is so morally good that you kind of root for him, and at the same time you relate to him because he's going through this as well. He was
Mm.
just a normal kid, and that's the kind of the way that the audience kind of looks at themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, that is a good final point probably about how they introduce Harry's character in just a generally likable way. They do make him like very average. Harry's like a super average kid. You know, he's special and chosen, but he's still like relatively average. But he does have areas in which he excels, and Quidditch is one of them. And that's great to have the like likability and relatability of a character, but at the same time have them skilled enough to for you to get behind them. You know, that was probably something that was a subtler point that really went towards making Harry the character that he is.
Yeah, the first one also kind of sets up the antagonists, I guess, for the franchise, and it sets up his mentor in Dumbledore. So
Hmm. Hmm.
he meets, you know, his rival at school is like Draco Malfoy, who's comes from a pureblood family. His family are like
Prick.
followers
Hmm.
or followers of Voldemort, sort of thing.
Yeah.
He meets Snape, who's a teacher at his school, who's the head of Slytherin House, who just fucking hates him from the off, and he has like
Yeah.
no idea why. He's like taking notes in his class, and he's like shouting at him.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That teacher fucking hates Harry. Uh-huh.
And it also sets up Dumbledore, who's this sort of like mystical father figure in the entirety of like Hogwarts, and he's the only wizard that Voldemort's ever feared, and you don't know why, but he's just this strange figure that seems to take a liking to Harry. So it
Mm.
kind of sets up all these characters as well. And it kind of got me thinking about what the point in antagonists even is, like in franchises like this. Like, so Harry has to face some sort of adversity
Yeah,
during this.
has to be
But
a goal we're aiming
I
for.
wasn't really sure why though. Why do you think there has to be like adversity? Does that make it an unlikable story if there's not?
Yeah, like I think that's like a basic human need, isn't it? Like you become invested in a character, you want them to do well. They can only do well if there's something to overcome, right?
Right.
And
Okay.
I guess in real scenarios, that's well, at least in scenarios that we enjoy reading and watching about, it tends to be people that have um goals that are in direct opposition to yours. And especially it's even better when they are plainly evil and the main character is plainly good, you know?
Yeah, I guess people have like complex dynamics as well, and that kind of makes them like interesting villains and antagonists because they're constantly shifting as well. It's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
character development
The
at the
more
same
depth
time.
that they have, the more you'll enjoy reading about the antagonist just as much as the protagonist.
Yeah.
Actually, and I think, sorry, but before there, I think the first couple of movies don't do a great job at giving the Malfoys much depth at all. I think they're just literally
Yeah,
rich assholes. You know, like they're bad because he smirks, and like the first scene with him,
yeah, yeah,
he's like he does like offer his hand out to try and like win Harry over and stuff like that, but he's just fucking oozing contempt. You know, you're obviously supposed to hate this guy, and you don't even know why. He just has blonde hair and he's green, so bad.
yeah. So he goes through the first film, makes all these relationships, and starts to go to these classes. He plays sports, and he's kind of it's hinted at that Voldemort's like this bad guy
Mm.
in this scenario, and eventually Harry has to find something. No, he has to find the MacGuffin. Eventually, at the end of the film, the Philosopher's Stone, because someone's trying to steal the stone. Doesn't know who it is. Turns out it's Voldemort, and he
Of
kind of
course it was.
ends up saving the day through. I guess he's clearly not ready to save the day yet, but J K Rowling kind of gives him the tools to do it that are like
Yeah,
totally
yeah,
out with his control. Whereas like if he just touches the bad guy, all of a sudden they become destroyed, and it's
sure.
like
Yeah, I mean, this was an example of him being the chosen one. You know,
yeah, it's
there was
just like a kind of climax for the first story, I guess, which was kind of world building in general. But the
Mhm.
first book does like a great job at like introducing you to those things. So when the second movie kind of steps up a notch, you're still amazed because it's like the next level of like magic when it comes to Hogwarts.
Right, sure, exactly. Mhm.
So when you move into the second film, there's more building, more world building here. Where this movie is, it shows you like another side of Hogwarts though, where it is kind of like a building in the first movie, but then it kind of gets expanded a little bit. And the second movie is the Chamber of Secrets, and it kind of
Mhm.
shows you a darker side to Hogwarts, where Harry gets back and he's kind of warned at the beginning of the movie that something evil is afoot at Hogwarts this year, and it sort of expands the movie into like the darker sides of Hogwarts sort of
Mm.
thing. So immediately at the very beginning though, he's kind of put back into his regular life, so his average Joe back to the Dursleys, you know, and he's kind of waiting for like summer to end, and you know. It ends up getting like grounded, and Ron like breaks him out with his like
Yeah,
with
yeah,
his like flying car, and it's like immediately just like ramped up to 11, you know,
yeah, yeah. Fuck it. Why the
where
hell not?
his best friend just all of a sudden breaks him out, and it's sort of like it shows you him in the monotony of life again, and then all of a sudden it just like clicks you right back into like
Yeah,
Hogwarts
that's
mode where
brilliant though. You need that. I don't know about you, but like, didn't you, whenever you started reading a new book, I used to dread the beginning because I knew he's going to be back with the Dursleys. You know, there's not going to be any magic. He's not going to be at school. So like, that was perfect where they actually was broken out by Ron. It's like all of a sudden these guys are fucking tight, you know, and he's breaking them out. The two brothers are there. It's like they've got flying cars now. It's like, oh, okay, good, good,
yeah,
good.
it's great action, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And then Ron kind of breaks him out and he takes him to his home, the Burrow, which is like a wizarding home. So it expands the universe there as well because Harry's never seen a wizarding home.
Yeah, that's
And he
right.
goes in, like the pots and pans are like cleaning themselves, and a jumper's like knitting itself.
Hmm.
And he's got this magic clock on the wall. And he starts to, like, the second book does a great job of it, of expanding that world as much as the first book did a great job at like introducing it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it does though, but that it's where this probably like the second movie is where my biggest problem with the whole series actually introduces itself, and that's just the way that J.K. Rowling has written her magic system. It's because it's what you'd call like a really soft magic system, right? There's not
Right.
really rules that exist there. There's not like a lot of the time it's just like you get the impression that J.K. Rowling's throwing in stuff because she just thinks it's quite a cool idea. You know, for instance,
Mm.
like pots and pans cleaning themselves. She doesn't think about the implications of how that would completely destroy worker welfare and like how the whole concept of doing a job wouldn't exist anymore if you can just make things do it themselves and like that type of thing. So this is already it's like the natural consequence of expanding the world, isn't it? And like trying to incorporate magic into everyday life. It's like we're now realizing that this is well, I when I'm watching it, I'm realizing it's like this is just not making sense anymore. But obviously, J.K. Rowling, when she's writing it, she's like, just don't think about that. You know, just enjoy, just buckle up and
I
enjoy what
think
you're watching.
I think that's what probably the majority of the audience is thinking as well. Though I don't think that the audience is like seriously considering the implications of like work. Like
Sure.
when you and I, especially when we spoke about like D&D, you know, we enjoy quite a deep system. We enjoy like getting our teeth into something like that. We
Sure.
enjoy,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, I read another book series last year called the Kingkiller Chronicle, which has a quite a in-depth magical system in it where he kind of goes through and explains all the things that the writer
Exactly. Yeah.
as he's
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
through. Harry Potter isn't really like that. You know, it's sort of like this is a magical world. Just sort of go along with it, kind of thing. It's a
Mm-hmm.
more kind of like surface level, which is fine as well. But I think you're right though. She does. I think it's clear in the books and in the movies that J K Rowling thinks of something that would be cool, and then tries to fit
Then
it
she,
in
yeah,
instead
yeah.
of like building a system and then thinking about things would spawn from that. She definitely goes from the end back to the start, sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Which is, I know we're talking about this pretty early on in terms of the series, but like, but it's when you said at the start like the world building was really good. I was like, I was at first I was like, is it really good? Because I don't know how much of it is like established enough. You know how like when I think a great way of telling a story is by, and I think the way that I would go about telling a story is by establishing the world, then thinking of a hook that happens in that world, and then the story effectively just writes itself. It's because you've got such an established world, and there are rules in place that if this happens, it causes that effect type of thing. I think it's quite obvious when you're reading about the Harry Potter world, then that is just not how the way things work. Everything's a bit airy fairy, and things are kind of moved along for the plot. But to be honest, at this stage in the series, at Chamber of Secrets, it's not a huge issue whatsoever. You know, it
There are
really isn't.
elements of that that I think are true, but I think the examples where I think this doesn't really make much sense are the things that are on like a really small scale. So they're like things that happen on not on a grand scale of like the franchise, but when things happen in like specific scenes, I'm like, you've put that in to be cool. You've not really thought about it. But when I look at the franchise as a whole, from like start to finish, in terms of the arc of the story, from film one to film eight, I always think it's done really well because I think J.K. Rowling had a great idea of where the franchise was like going to end. Like she had like the start and the end, and it was kind of like
Mm,
building it up in between. It wasn't like the story was meandering at any point. It was sort of like she knew where it was going. It was sort of like, okay, how do we get there now? Which I think is quite a good way to like look at it
yeah.
instead of having an end in sight. Sort of defines your goals, if you know what I mean, when you're like writing the bit in between.
Well, do you not think a lot about Harry Potter kind of does just write itself just due to the fact that, like you said, these are high school drama films, and each
Sure.
film is a year of high school. You know, it's like a defined year in his life. It's like we start first. The book is going to be him learning about it. The second book is him going to be like dipping his toe. The third book is going to start taking exams. You know, and like da 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 da. And like there's like set points that did present themselves in these movies that probably made writing them easier for J.K. Rowling, and also made the stories really, really enjoyable as well. It's because you knew what you were getting into, and you knew this was going to be his year at school. So that was, you're right. There is. I'm not at all trying to say that it was meandering. It was quite focused, I suppose, in where it went to go. I think that a theme I have with the series is just like small repercussions that are not thought of, which it is nitpicking. You know, it's no doubt about it. And that's the reason why it doesn't ruin the series whatsoever for me. I still love the series. It's just that there are certain things which are like weird. But as I said, in the earlier books, it's not a huge problem at all. You know, the way that they deal with it is quite good. Like, you know, for instance, they introduce this concept of flying cars, but then immediately they talk about how Ron's dad, he works in like the specific industry, in the ministry, sorry, that deals with like muggle affairs or relations or something like that. So like
The
it already
misuse of
answers.
Muggle artifacts.
Right, exactly, yeah. So like they're tying it in and they're kind of answering questions. It's like, what does every wizard have does it have a magical car? How the fuck does that work? And it's like, oh, there's actually a whole division of people that deal with that. Don't worry about it, type of thing. So it's just it doesn't just throw concepts at you. It's like it's really clever. And I should say as well, I love the concept of the ministry, which I was that introduced in the first movie? Maybe it was only the second. Oh no, it must have been the first. It's because he met.
I think
Um,
there was like an idea that there was like a ministry behind the scenes, but I don't think that was really introduced until the second movie.
mhm,
So
mhm,
the minister ends up coming to Hogwarts because the Chamber of Secrets is opened.
exactly, yeah.
Which kind of and that kind of introduces the aspect of like government. It's a more secondary layer again. But the first movie introduces Hogwarts. The second movie starts to show you that Hogwarts is actually a bit more, and there's also a world behind it where you see a
Mm,
household. You see that there is a ministry here. So they start showing you Hogwarts in the sense that there's a bit of evil there, in the Chamber of Secrets. They talk a bit about the sort of founders of Hogwarts.
there's a history there, isn't there?
Yeah, and throughout the movie, there's this reference to this Chamber of Secrets, which has a monster inside of it, and it kind of becomes the antagonist of the movie, where
Mhm.
Harry's kind of going through, and Harry's almost he seems to be compelled to like find out these things and root out the evil. He seems to like have this in him, this investigator sort of personality where
Sure.
he can't
Okay.
help himself but like meddle
Yeah.
in
Even if
there.
it gets him in trouble, you know, and inadvertently
Exactly.
does.
Yeah, exactly. So we find out about the Chamber of Secrets. Eventually, it turns out at the end it is Voldemort once again. Um, but I read, not read, sorry, I watched quite an interesting video on YouTube.
Hmm?
At one point, I was on a Jordan Peterson rabbit hole where I was watching like his lectures at university, and
It's easily done.
I think the one that got me into that actually was there was an analysis of the second Harry Potter film that he did for one of his lectures, and
Okay.
he was talking about how Harry kind of goes to the school, and the school kind of encounters a problem, and in order to solve that problem, Harry has to go to the depths. Basically has to go to hell in the school, and he has to like kill the monster, and it's going to really hurt him to do it. But he does it, and at the end, he kind of comes out all the better for it. And he
Mm.
also saves the virgin as well, which is like a trope,
Yeah. Sure.
which is like a trope in these
It's
stories.
almost biblical, the story, isn't it? I hadn't thought
Yeah,
about that.
he was kind of talking about the fact that it's sort of how humans deal with like problems in general, especially
Right.
big problems where you go into like a sort of depressive recession. You
Hmm.
kind of go down deep within yourself. You kind of try and root out the monster, and you move on sort of better and stronger for it. And Harry also happens to save a woman in the process. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's actually quite a symbolic story. The
And
second
very
one,
traditional in some ways. You're right.
yeah,
It is the you know the prince saves the princess, and kills the dragon. That is, you're right enough. That's exactly
yeah,
what that movie is, and that's like folklore that's in our psyche. You know, that's like really really deep in how the humans think about things. So yeah, that's bizarre. I hadn't thought about that. I should just say, by the way, as well, that I thought the fantastic beasts that are introduced in these films as well are amazing. Like I love the magical creatures and the way they take them. Like you start by now you've seen Fox, and you hear about like fucking all these other mental things. The basilisk. I remember when I was watching the movies being shit scared of that basilisk. By the way, like
hmm.
truly terrified. Like these movies, they weren't afraid of being a bit creepy at times as well, even though the audience were for kids. I actually have absolutely no doubt about that.
Yeah, which probably isn't a bad thing either. I can
No,
imagine
no,
like I imagine kids probably quite enjoy that, which
yeah.
they obviously did. But when we look at these two, what I've realized about Harry Potter is that almost the 8 movies come in like 3 arcs, and the first two make up the first arc, which is the stage setting and the world building for the story that's about to take place.
Hmm.
And the first 2 movies are also clearly quite juvenile compared to the rest of them. I think
Yeah,
they're more for children, which is sort of appealing to us though because we were kids at the time. It was kind of
exactly. Yeah.
appealing to its core audience at the time, which was children. And then when we move into the third film, it almost moves into the second arc of the three, I think, where it puts the real story in motion. And it's actually the only film that Voldemort isn't in, but it sort of kickstarts the story. And it almost
Hmm.
moves away from this like childlike atmosphere, and it becomes a bit more like teen angsty sort of thing. If you know,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
movie's a
yeah.
bit darker, like tonal wise as well. The colors are a bit darker. It's not. I think the music changes as well. The kind of theme that goes throughout it. It's no longer this like happy-go-lucky Harry Potter.
Yeah,
It becomes
yeah,
a
yeah,
bit
yeah.
darker. You know.
Yeah, I always remember that. See, like every movie has like the opening scenes. It's like Harry Potter and the da 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 da. Da. It's like the first 2 movies. I'm pretty sure the text is like rimmed with gold. You know, like it's beautiful, angelic, and then after that it becomes darker and darker and darker. And you're right, the third one is where we first see this shift in tone. It's probably also where like the kids start going through puberty as well. So I kind of
Sure.
understand why it becomes darker from their perspective. I hadn't. You're right. That the things start going a bit more serious in those movies, right? And like even from like the very beginning, you're introduced to like Sirius, and like we're talking about criminals now. They're like insane that kill people. Like this is something in the previous books. It was like we knew Voldemort was bad, but you didn't really know why he was bad. You know that there was a war. You didn't know what the hell happened. This is where we start piercing a little bit deeper into the
Mm-hmm.
world building. I think.
Just as a quick aside, the thing you're talking about is correct when you say the letters at the start of the movie. If you look at all 8 movies, the letters get periodically more rusted, like
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as that kind of moves on, as an aside. But
Mm.
yes, so in the third movie, you're right. It is a bit darker. It immediately introduces this madman killer that is
Mm.
apparently on the loose, and
Okay.
immediately Ron's dad is like, "He's coming to kill you, Harry."
Yeah,
Just
that's right.
tells him
Yeah,
like he's like, "This is the guy that killed your parents, and now he's come back to finish the job," sort of thing.
that's
And
right.
Harry's just like
But
this teenager with his glasses on, his hair sticking up. He's kind of like, "What
I'm
the
just
fuck are you?"
Harry.
Yeah, he's like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" But he goes through this movie learning about Sirius Black, and he starts to fight off these creatures as well that are called Dementors, which seem to affect him more than anyone else.
That's right. That's right.
And I thought those were kind of like symbolic as well, because the Dementors kind of feed off like happy memories, and they leave you with like the darkest points. That's in the lore. They leave you with like your darkest thoughts. And Harry has like the worst past out of like anyone. So it's almost like he feels like his problems are like worse than anyone else's, and they
Mm.
are, which is something that like every teenager feels, right? Every teenager thinks that their own problems are like the worst in the
Sure.
entire
Yeah.
world, and it's almost another level of Harry, which it makes him annoyingly relatable without the
Mm.
audience really even like realizing, you know?
Yeah, I always kind of thought that the Dementors are kind of like representative of your own demons, right? As you said, like if you have like more negative emotions, I've always got the impression they have like a stronger effect on you, and they're able to affect you more severely. And Harry, exactly, is like we were just saying in the first couple of weeks, you'd realize that he's had a really some aspects of his life have been really shitty and unfair, you know. So it's that was a good moment of vulnerability, I suppose. But that's what was so great about it. This like moment of vulnerability and this like weakness to the mentors that just opens the door for him being special in another way, where they introduce the Patronus, right?
Sure, he has a new teacher this year, and he's like, "I'll teach you a spell to fight Dementors, Harry, but it's way above anything you should be able to do right now."
Yeah,
Harry does it
exactly.
like third try, you know. He's
Yeah,
like, he's got it straight away. He's
yeah,
eating the chocolate, all that stuff. It's like, holy shit, you're actually something special, kid, you know.
that's right.
And you're right earlier when you said that Harry only has that in like certain aspects of his personality. You know, he's good at flying. He's really good at defense against the dark arts because, if spoilers, he fucking
Yeah,
has to be.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Otherwise, he'd be dead.
Yeah, exactly. So he's kind of going through this movie, and like Sirius Black is kind of like in the background, sort of going on. There's more world building here as well, where we see there's like a transport service at the start. There's like a bus
Oh,
service,
yeah.
and we see how
Night
that
bus.
works. We also see there's like a town next to Hogwarts that's like specifically a wizarding village,
Meet
and we're
Crouch
like,
again, don't we?
yeah, how that sort of works in this world. It's like a whole town instead of just a house or a
Mm.
school or something like that. So there's still more world building that's going on,
Mhm.
but it's almost taking a back seat at this point to the
Yeah,
story.
it's not as wondrous as it once was. It's like Harry's used to it, but he's not seen this for the first time anymore. He's like walking over to like a pub that's like a complete wizarding pub type of thing, and like magic's going on in the background, but he doesn't really think about it anymore.
Yeah, it's not like he sees something and he's like, "Holy shit!" He see, the bus pops out. It's invisible. It pops out, and he just kind of like looks at it and he goes,
I
and
guess
gets on.
you're
And
catching the bus. Yeah, exactly.
he's like,
Yeah.
yeah, another thing that I didn't know about, sort of thing.
Hmm.
That's completely bonkers. But now he's just kind of like accepting it. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Hmm.
So he goes through this movie, kind of learning about this Sirius Black character who he kind of learns a bit about his backstory and how he's the person that betrayed his parents, like turned him into Voldemort. But he also finds out that he's actually his godfather because it was his dad's best friend.
That's right. Yeah.
So has this like burning hatred for him, and all of a sudden he's like, "Oh, I'm actually gonna find him now,"
Yeah.
because he seems to be this sort of like wicked person. And then ultimately, in the end, he finds out that Sirius actually isn't the person that did this. There was another person there, and he was framed for it. And the story that everyone thinks they know is actually wrong. And then Sirius turns around and he's like, "By the way, you can like live with me. You don't have to live at your aunt and uncle's anymore."
Right, yeah.
And it's like, Jesus Christ, man, what else can go right for this kid?
Yeah, exactly. It's fucking paid off in the end, didn't it? That,
Yeah.
yeah, and he also that's the movie where he gets the Marauders map as well. Like he literally gets given the blueprints, this entire castle. He learns about every secret passageway there is. He can navigate that thing however he wants. He's got the fucking invisibility cloak for ages now. Like this guy's
Oh
he's
yeah.
stacked at this stage. He really is stacked.
Yeah, he can do no wrong. He literally wanders the castle at night on his own, can't be seen, can see anyone that's coming around corners so he can hide himself. J K Rowling really gives him the tools to create an adventure. You know
That's
what I
right.
mean?
Yeah, that's
It's
right.
like if
Yeah,
he
yeah,
needs to
yeah.
sneak out at night, you better believe he
Don't
fucking
worry, he's
can.
gonna got it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So obviously that ends up going wrong. The new teacher that kind of comes around, who is also one of his dad's friends, turns out to be a werewolf, and that kind of scuppers the whole thing up. They end up capturing the guy who did in fact betray his parents, but he manages to escape, and the whole thing's a fucking nightmare. And at this point, though, what is easily the worst thing in the franchise happens, and this is one of the things I'm thinking. J.K. Rowling just introduced something and didn't think about the repercussions of it, and it was like just something to keep the plot going.
Mm-hmm.
She introduces time travel.
Oh shit! I didn't even think about that one. I've got a couple of lists, and I have one for this movie. But fuck me, time turners. Oh my god, she did not know what she was getting into when
Nope,
she wrote that in
not at all.
whatsoever, did
It's
she?
easily the worst bit of the world building. It doesn't make any fucking sense. Like, no, these things, these devices that no one has access to, is given to a 13-year-old girl so that she can take a couple more classes, and then her headmaster's like encouraging her to use it to try and change the
To
change
change
the
the
flow of
timeline.
events.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
There are so many repercussions for that in like movie franchises. I just hate when
Yeah,
franchises do it in general because
yeah.
it never makes fucking sense.
To be fair, for Harry Potter, isn't it one of the is it, you know how like there's obviously different movies have different models of time. Harry Potter is one of the ones where you cannot actually change. It has always happened. The actions that you will have went back in time, you've already done back in time. So you're not actually changing a timeline. The timeline is constant. You're just repeating the cycle of that timeline, right? So
I guess
it's
it sort of makes sense in the sense that you're in a magical universe. Like, I just cast a spell and that'll take me back in time, and it'll be the same timeline, but I'll just be there before, sort of thing. So you can
yeah.
kind of brush it away a
It's
little
not
bit.
the most egregious example, but it is
No,
like
you're right.
it is weird though, yeah. And like the fact that like you're also like biological aging while you're doing this, you know, like Hermione's like a year older than everyone by the end of this, I guess. You're like, what the fuck's going on here?
Yeah, oh, yeah, I'm not too sure about that, but it's more the fact that not everyone in the world just like why don't people have these things? You know, it's like
That's
people
mm,
aren't just running around like two versions of themselves aren't just like running around
yeah.
sort of thing.
That is
But she
one of
has
the
it at
problems
school.
I have. Yeah, that's a problem I have with like the artifacts in Harry Potter or like the resources I have available. Some of them seem so wildly broken, like OP as fuck, that no matter how difficult these things are to make, everyone would have one. You know, there's just no
Yeah,
doubt about it. And like this is a great example, a fantastic example, which we'll get to later on, is like liquid luck. You know, it's like there are certain things which just break this setting
yeah.
over your fucking knee, and it is J.K. Rowling. This is a clear example of where it was like thrown in because it's cool as hell, but there was absolutely no thought put into it whatsoever.
No, it was just a way for her to sort of like save the day at the end of the
Yeah,
day, wasn't it? It
and
was like a
a,
sort of to
a
save
cleverish way.
the climax of the movie, I guess.
Mhm. But I mean, outside of the actual implementation, did you not think? I really quite enjoyed, like looking back. I'm sure it doesn't make a huge amount of sense, but like when you're figuring it out, you know, when you realize that Hermione was the one that like got them out of the shack, is because Thingy was coming down. Like when you start putting these things together and you start realizing that was why the hippogriff was in the right location at the right time. I thought it was quite well done, to be honest with you. Like it's quite enjoyable. You know, it's pretty smart-ish for back then.
Yeah,
You were pretty young when you're
at
reading it.
least she knew how it was going to end, so that she could like plan it as she was writing it, sort of thing.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
good idea. It's a good piece of evidence for how like she sees the end of the movie, so she can like write it in the middle, sort of thing. It allows her to plan for
exactly.
the end, which I think is quite good.
Like she knew.
What was the problem that you had about the movie?
Oh, is this not the movie where? Oh no, actually no. Sorry, I'm thinking of Goblet of Fire actually. So we'll wait till the next movie when that gets introduced. But it was just I want to specifically talking about the curses because
Okay,
yeah, because those are confusing to me. There's also like this. I guess what I can touch on now is that I just don't understand in the Harry Potter world how difficulty works. You know what? How is it more difficult to cast a spell
Sure.
Is it your movement or your wrist? Is that like an extremely precise? Like, see, for the highest level spells, you have to have like micron accuracy, precision, and the way you flick this fucking wand, or like, is it to do with your willpower? Because if it is, there's absolutely no mention of that in the books of having to like the fortitude or the mental strength of will to pull off a spell. Like, I don't.
I think that there has to be an element of like wand movement in it, because that's quite a big point in the first movie where Hermione can like do the spell that
Sure,
nobody else
switch
can.
and flick.
She
Right.
clearly has the skill to do the wand movements that allow her to do the spell. I think there is some mention in the books about how some spells require willpower. There's
Really.
specifically in the next book, there's a bit where Harry has to try and like force himself to do something. But I'm gonna go into that in a bit. I think
Yeah,
there's a
yeah, yeah.
little bit about some spells having like the mental willpower to like do it. But you're right, it is sort of, it's one of those things where her magic system isn't so deep that she hasn't really clearly defined those things. So you're right, there is
Hmm.
an element of confusion when it comes to who can do these spells and why can't they work for everyone.
Yeah, like at this stage in the books, when I'm reading like Prisoner of Azkaban, it's like when they're in classes, it feels like they're literally just learning like lists of spells. Like they're just learning more utility. It seems like they're just learning, they have like more and more stuff under their belt here, where they're just able to like do things. You know, they're starting to like manipulate water and fire and stuff like that. But I just don't understand. Yeah, I don't know how they're actually learning that. It seems to me that they're reading about it on a board, learning how to move a wand, then they're just fucking casting it. But you know, it's one of those things again that doesn't actually impact the results of the movie or the book. Sorry, it's like doesn't it wouldn't change the ending. It's just a minor gripe.
Yeah, I think there probably has to be some element of concentration to it as well. But like,
Presumably.
I'm not exactly sure if J K Rowling has thought about it in terms of that sort of deep level mechanics of how our magic system works.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so they save the day with the time travel. They go back. They manage to save Sirius. They don't quite clear his name though, so he still has to go into hiding.
Mm-hmm.
But they also save the hippogriff, so he flies away at the end of the movie. And jobs are good at the end of the day. You know, he's still alive, and Harry now knows he has a godfather, which is top notch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it has an option of leaving the fucking Dursleys. You know, it was a great ending to the book. Felt pretty
Yeah.
bright.
So we go into the fourth movie, and I think that this is the one where I really realised that it was taking a bit of a serious turn. And this movie is actually quite dark, I think, at certain points.
Mm-hmm.
And just as an aside, the world building goes off the fucking charts in this movie.
It
Where
does.
you're now at this point, you're not surprised by anything. So he attends the Quidditch World Cup final, which is a huge sporting event, and
Thousands of wizards in a field.
you
Mm-hmm.
you don't even bat an eyelid.
Mm-hmm.
He attends. There's a Triwizard tournament at Hogwarts, so there's like other schools that come into play. Turns out there's other schools around Europe. People don't even know
Why
where
the
they
fuck
are,
not? Yeah,
but
yeah, exactly.
but they're coming to the school for this tournament that's held every so often.
Mm-hmm.
And we also get introduced to orders, which are the
Right. Yeah,
dark
yeah.
wizard fighters at this point, because
Mm-hmm.
there is a teacher that comes to the school who is an ex-order,
Mm-hmm.
who has basically put a bunch of dark wizards into wizarding prison.
Mm-hmm.
It's like basically like a sort of police force, I guess, if you will,
Yeah, yeah,
for
that's exactly what it is.
for this movie.
For malpractice, misuse.
Yeah, and that's what you're talking about, where this teacher kind of comes in, and they're quite excited to get taught by him because he's seen real world stuff, and he does introduce these unforgivable curses in quotation marks, that are these highly illegal curses that will literally get you a one-way ticket to prison should you be caught like casting any of them. What do you think about those? What was your issue with those?
Well, in general, this is where the concept of like power in the Harry Potter movies for me just breaks down altogether. It does. I think it stops making sense now, because like we're at the stage where we're talking about these curses. One of them tortures someone, another one kills them instantly, and another one makes them your thrall. These are like these are like I'm like in terms of overpowered spells, they're fucking high up there.
Yeah.
And we're told in the books and the movies that all it takes is you need to mean it. You need to like cast this spell, and like everyone has it in them. You just want to really, if you like, you can't half-heartedly cast like a Avada the killing curse. You need to want to kill that person. But as long as you do, it's kind of like I always got the impression that was just something you can do. Like it's not.
Yeah.
There's no like. There is. So this is where I'm start thinking like we're living in this world where like utilities like this are available to every single wizard, and like I know they're like like you're not supposed to ever do them, but we know people can do them, because we saw Moody do it, and that wasn't illegal or anything like that. There wasn't like the trace didn't trace that he was using a particular curse. So it's like it's just this is where I'm like, this is now ridiculous, and like it also before we even like, but this also this movie is great because like see at the very beginning you may like mention like the Triwizard tournament, but like that was also probably the first example of where we saw like the damage that dark wizards can do against other wizards, right? It's because it's during that, right? Is that right? Because like during that is where we see the Death Eaters attack and like burn down all the camps and that everyone is staying in and stuff like that, and like someone cast the mark in the air for the first time. And I remember specifically watching this movie, and it's like there were thousands of wizards at that game, man, thousands, and there were 10 Death Eaters. 10.
Yeah, I think it shows you on like a smaller scale. I think there's supposed to be more of them.
There's like an army of them.
It's just like the Flash that Harry sees. I think in the books it specifically says that there are people that are like joining the crowd of Death Eaters. Like there are people at the World Cup who are actually followers of Voldemort, and they're joining them as they're like doing this sort of thing, and they're becoming like quite a force. In the end,
why? How? I don't understand how in this universe.
In the book, they were also, I think, they were specifically using like Muggles as like human shields as well. So they had like a couple of Muggles that they were like levitating in the air.
How did people know they were Muggles? If they're like, how did they get Muggles to this, to a Quidditch match?
In the books, there's a Muggle that is like stamping tickets basically on the way in. And they keep having to like change his memory every time that someone goes past, and he starts like figuring things out.
Okay.
So he's basically just like on the borders. I think they're like Muggles kind of all over the place to kind of shoo people away if they come, sort of thing. And they basically take these Muggles and they sort of levitate them in the air over their heads, and it's kind of like, well, we can't fire a curse into that crowd, because if we hit someone that's controlling a Muggle, the Muggle will just fall to the ground or whatever. So it's sort of like they kind of use them as like human shields a little bit, and then I think the crowd just start to get like kind of bigger and bigger, and they're lighting fire to things and shit. So the crowd kind of starts dispersing.
I know,
but
man.
it does become a bit bigger.
I don't think like we've been like think about the utility that the magic system has been given thus far in these movies. From what we've understand, from what we've seen, magic can't do anything. Can't not do anything. Sorry, it's fucking useless. It's like it seems like there's an answer for literally every single situation. We're literally seeing kids that have been using magic for 3 years. We're in a field here with thousands of experienced magic users that have went through high school. This is trivial stuff to them. Everyone in there knows what the killing curse is. Like this isn't unknown to them. It's like I just don't see. I know that you're using like human shields and stuff like that, and they've probably got like a decent force of them. But when every wizard has the potential of like mass destruction, I just don't see how numbers don't trump in this scenario. Like how can you have like sure Death Eaters are probably well trained with like combative magic and stuff like that, but when you start talking about like the curses, I just don't see how could you ever take a force that size that are that capable. No, if you're like a tiny number like that. So like this is where like we start introducing like the power dynamics of curses. We start introducing like concept of people being afraid of Death Eaters. I just don't buy it in that way. I really don't.
The franchise definitely does like it expects you to kind of gloss over the fact it's like, to do a killing curse you really have to mean it, and not a lot of people can like muster the will to like kill someone, and it kind of leaves it at that. It leaves like, it kind of asks you to accept that, I guess. That's like the only explanation you get. It's like someone like Harry, for example. Harry just can't fucking do the killing curse because he can't muster it up inside himself to like kill someone. Whereas the Death Eaters are like this inherently evil force, and I think these people like they can kill people, so they have like access to this crazy curse, and that's probably why it's like so dangerous. I think the franchise does like a bit of, well, you're just gonna have to accept this here, where good people can't do these things, sort of thing.
But how the hell, like, sure, frankly, the killing curse seems like overkill when you've got spells like Obliviate, which can just throw people 50 foot across a room, you know, like you don't need a killing curse when the levels of power we're talking about exist like this, you know, like it's unnecessary. It's just, I don't get
Sure.
it, man. You know,
You're right. I think there are ways to like fight those curses as well, though. When like there are protective magics that you can use to fight those things. I also like to point out, by the way, that I'm not going to correct every single tiny little like error you make in the lore. Like when you say Moody had the trace, and he doesn't. I know he doesn't have the trace anymore because he's over 17. And you say obliviate, like fling someone
oh,
across the room, obliviates the memory, wipe and curse. But I'm not going to like go through and like pick up every single little thing.
I'm glad.
Yeah, but yeah.
But
So
for the viewers that are watching this that are just as into Harry Potter as you, yes, thank you for making them aware of that.
yeah, yeah. So it introduces these curses, and it kind of asks you to accept that like Harry and like Dumbledore, they kind of can't do these things. And it's limited to the evil wizards, and the evil wizards are the ones that kind of join Voldemort, so they'll end up doing these things. And the spells that are available to like Harry and the good wizards are sort of defendable spells. So you got like Harry can cast a bunch of spells, but these spells can be protected against, they can be repelled, stuff like
Yeah.
that. It kind of asks you to accept that, I guess. And I don't think a lot of people don't think about it like that on that kind of level, but I think it does do a bit of just accept this and move on, doesn't
But
it?
that's what's bullshit though. It's because like they're asking you to just accept it, but they literally introduce the concept of wizard dueling. You know, they
Mm-hmm.
make out as if this is like a highly regimented system that makes sense and there's skill involved with it.
Yeah.
But then we don't see that. And also the one instance of a duel that we do witness is just bizarre. It's like one casts a curse, the other person just sponges it, the other person casts one, and it's this weird back and forth type of thing. My understanding of Harry Potter is that like if you are, it's basically like just fucking Texas shoot 'em. You know, if you're faster, you're going to win this, and if you're just as fast as the other person, you're going to form that
A bit of a
thing where the
magical
two,
stalemate.
yeah, the magical stalemate. It's like to me the whole concept of dueling in this system as well is just almost moot.
Yeah, I think the dueling system is kind of like that fastest draw, like who can do the most spells, who's the quickest, who can incorporate the quickest number of spells, like can you kind of overpower your opponent with like your skill. I think that is how I see it personally. You're right though, when they introduce it in the second movie, it's kind of like Harry and Draco are kind of like sponging these weak level curses though. I think it's showcased better in the fifth movie when you
I
see
was going, yeah, we will talk about it.
the duel there.
Yeah, that for me is high magic, you know.
Yeah,
But we'll get to that.
so they introduce these curses, and the Moody shows them what they are, in this Defense Against the Dark Arts class. And then moving forward, the Trials or Tournament kind of starts a couple of months into the semester, and Harry's name somehow gets entered into the cup. So fucking hell!
How did that happen?
I guess that
Always
had to happen
Harry.
for the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So he somehow gets
Harry's
entered
just
into the
rolling his
cup.
eyes like, I swear, fucking God, guys, I don't know how this keeps happening.
Yeah, and then the government says, well, he has to take part.
Government.
They don't withdraw him, so he has to take part.
The back of Dumbledore's mind, he's like, this kid's gonna fight a dragon. But the government says that's okay, so
Exactly. So Harry goes through these three trials, one of which is to fight a dragon, one of which is to
The first
hold
one.
your breath underwater for an hour, and the other one is to go through this endless labyrinth to find this cup.
Yeah.
And the labyrinth does seem to be endless when the movie pans over it. It's like, how is anyone going to find a cup in there?
Yeah.
But Harry seems to do it remarkably quickly.
That's true.
The movie kind of basically explains it off as he gets a bunch of like help in all these trials from someone along the way.
Yeah, exactly.
And
That's a good point.
he gets a bit lucky as well, and he uses a bit of his own skill and nerve as he goes along. But it turns out at the end of the day, this Moody teacher has been an imposter the entire time. He's actually been one of Voldemort's followers. Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the end, Harry kind of grabs the cup and it transports him into a graveyard, where he immediately gets like pinned up against a wall, and Voldemort has created this potion that requires a bit of Harry's blood in order to kind of resurrect himself. So we get this really cool scene at the end, actually, this really dark, cool scene where Voldemort kind of comes back and he kind of summons all of his minions, and they have a little bit of discussion, a little bit of
It
exposition.
dresses them down, you know.
Yeah, they have a little bit of exposition while Harry's sort of like pinned up against it.
That is wait, no wait.
And it does this. The movie has this like climax where it shows you Harry against Voldemort, and it clearly shows you that Harry is way out of his league. Like he has like no
As it
chance.
should be. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like not ready for it, and he basically gets saved again by a total fluke. Like a bunch of things that happen that just basically showcase that Harry is the chosen one. He escapes death, an
Time
insurmountable
and time again.
amount
Yeah,
of times in
yeah.
these movies. No matter how good he is, like Voldemort's just like better, um, and it showcases the kind of power that he has, and that Harry's like still like too young to be dealing with it, sort of thing.
Mm.
But I think one of the good things about this movie is it kind of gets dark as its audience becomes ready to see things that are a bit darker. You know, at this point, people that are watching are like 14, 15.
Oh, right, right.
They're starting to get to the age where they're becoming young adults, sort of thing, and they can take a bit more of this darker drama, which I think the movie does like really well. And as an aside, in this movie, at 14 years old, Harry eventually fancies a girl at some point during
For
this
him.
movie.
Mm.
So yeah, I think the movie definitely catches up with the audience as it's like going. Whereas the first two movies and even the third movie to an extent are for like younger audiences. The
Mm.
movies are growing up, and we
Well,
see that in the books as well as they get longer and longer and they require
yeah,
more attention to read.
that's true. Yeah. Well, it's not only, well, we are totally correct in that like it reflects the audience, and the audience was growing up with the books, but it also just like reflects Harry and like the cast. Like you couldn't have like the problems that they're being faced. You couldn't face an 11-year-old with. You know, it wouldn't
Yeah,
have been. Well, it wouldn't have been fucking good reading anyway. For one thing, because it would have stretched any realms of possibility. You wouldn't have believed that a younger kid could go through the Triwizard Tournament. It was like a stretch to believe that Harry got through, but even still, it was done in a really good way. Where, like, exactly like you said, you saw that it wasn't because he was just like blindly gifted. You saw it was like a good dose of luck there, but also he like had friends, and he, like people liked him in the correct amount of ways, and he like once again like Hermione and Ron come through for him, even though you do start seeing like some fractions in the relationship and stuff like that, and it's yeah that was a really great example of Harry being average again, but coming to a good climax.
one of the things at this point as well, when you go through the Triwizard Tournament, that's
Mm-hmm.
just a fucking cool concept in general.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
we're looking at like the Quidditch World Cup and the Triwizard Tournament are probably like you didn't even think before that there could be a Quidditch World Cup, and it's like introduced. Like this movie does a great job at being like almost like flexing its muscles as to
Mm-hmm.
how cool this world actually is. Where it's like we've now established a world where you know that you'll be experiencing things that you can't even expect just now, but it does like a great job of just introducing things that are so fucking cool. It's unreal, like the mer people and stuff like that, and the trial, and the dragon
Mm.
that Harry has to fight, and the schools and how they get there, and the Quidditch World Cup. It's like all these things are just great storytelling. You know, they're
Yeah,
really good.
it's a lot of cool shit, isn't it? Really, really cool
Yeah,
shit. Especially, I remember like I always remember like the introduction of the other schools. Like you've got the guys from, you've got the guys, you know, and they've got their staffs. They're stamped around the very like Eastern Bloc country type of thing. It's like, oh yeah, I would go to that school. Then it's like all the girls come in, they're fluttering around, stuff like that. I remember folk talking at school about yeah, what school they'd want to be in and what type of wizard they'd be and stuff like that. It just, it very, especially when you're young, it just like totally applies itself to you putting yourself in this world, you know, because it's believable enough, and you, I guess it's a consistent thing. You just do get this sense of history with everything that's involved. I genuinely feel.
yeah. It also does this really weird thing with the schools though, where it makes all of the men from the school that's the boys, they're all like these really masculine, like super strong
They're also
guys.
really
Like
old. Yeah.
yeah, they're like masculine men, if you know what I mean. And then you
Yeah.
get
Oh
the
yeah.
school that's like the women, and they're all like
Ultra
gorgeous, and
feminine. Yeah.
they're all
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
really like feminine women sort of thing.
Hmm.
Where it's sort of like it almost makes these schools look perfect. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like in their own way.
Hmm.
Yeah, but at this point, I think it's pretty clear that like the way that J K Rowling tells the story is like really really good. She's like a really good storyteller in the sense that as we're going through, I'm now starting to like really enjoy myself, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's a good point. Also, just like it was a really good like we're talking like the fourth movie here, and this is when we finally see Dumbledore, like a version of Voldemort in his prime, and it was just a perfect time for it. You know, like we've been building up to this for quite a while now, and the unveiling was just amazing. And the actor they found for Dumbledore, why do I keep saying Dumbledore for Voldemort is just like great again. I really, really, I can't remember what that guy's called, but he was just
Ralph
absolutely
Fiennes.
Ralph Fiennes. Yeah, 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 a fucking perfect example. He's just so creepy, and yeah, I remember for the unveil. It was perfectly done. It was a long time coming, but it did not like underhype it at all. The only thing that was kind of strange was the fact that I think they might have pushed the realms of reality a little bit when it came to Dumbledore not actually killing Harry. I know that at the end of the Goblet of Fire, he was like playing with him, very much so, and like like trying to like gloat, and like he was like bigging himself up to the other Death Eaters because they were like, this guy just died with a fucking baby.
Yeah.
But it was like. I guess that was another moment where it kind of pushed the realms of believability in order to keep telling the story. At the end of the day, Harry Potter is the chosen one, therefore he couldn't have died. But at the same time, it's like, why the fuck couldn't he have died?
Yeah,
He should have.
she does. J K Rowling introduces like another new concept in Priori Incantatem, where the two wands all of a sudden it's like, oh, you guys actually can kill each other, and it's
Yeah.
like every time that Harry comes up against something, all of a sudden he gets exactly the right thing that he needs in that exact moment to then go on to manage to survive at the very least and to get back.
Mm.
So he goes back and he reports this to Dumbledore, which kind of sets up the next movie quite nicely because Harry tells everyone when he goes back that Voldemort's back, but he's the only person that witnesses it because the other
Yeah.
person he was with gets killed by Voldemort.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's Harry tells the story, but then in the opening of the fifth movie, Voldemort is kind of back and he's looming in the background for the audience, but there are deniers, and more
Exactly. Yeah.
importantly, the Ministry kind of denies it. The Ministry of Magic denies that he's returned, and then they just basically try to suppress Harry and Dumbledore, who believes Harry,
Mm-hmm.
which is I guess it's sort of a tool that they use to showcase the fear that the wizarding world kind of feels towards Voldemort. When he was around last time, it was like this terrible, terrible time, and they use it as like this tool to be like, no, we can't go back to that. He's not back, guys, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's. But I guess in a realistic world, it's in the interest of the Ministry not to cause panic, and I can't imagine like the guy that caused the last Wizarding War being returned. I don't know, like I've never gotten a really good impression of how damaging the Wizarding War was in Harry Potter. Like, how many people died here? Like, because when I imagine war, I'm not imagining fucking trenches, right? I'm imagining like
No.
hits against enclaves or something like that, or schools or families being burnt down or something. So I have wondered in the past, how bad was Voldemort really? It's because we don't ever get a real chance to see him like on a crusade, right?
Yeah, we don't even see that in the movies at all, I wouldn't say.
No.
And
Mm-hmm.
you're right. I'm not exactly sure about that. I haven't done like maybe there is stuff about
I'm sure
research
she will
about
have
it.
come out afterwards and
She
said,
might have answered some questions about it or something, but I'm not
mm-hmm.
exactly sure. I'm just aware of the fact that I think and during the First Wizarding War, like when Voldemort decided you were dead, sort of thing, and
Right, okay.
the mark was like above your house, and he was like a mass terrorist, and it wasn't like trench warfare or anything like that, but
No, yeah, uh-huh.
it was hide your kids, hide your wife, like
Mm-hmm. It
just
was a
get
war.
just get out of Dodge, sort of thing, like don't
Right,
mess
okay.
with him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the Ministry denies that Voldemort is back in general, and Harry ends up getting attacked when he's with the Dursleys by these Dementors again, and he has to cast a spell to get out of it.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
the Ministry basically tries to expel him because he used a spell underage outside of Hogwarts, which is
Yeah.
like Harry's totally within his rights to do so, to defend himself in like life-threatening situations. But the Ministry basically doesn't buy it. But so they attempt to expel him, but Harry has like an eyewitness to the event, so he ends up like getting off with it. But there's a very clear agenda here where the Ministry are trying to brandish him and Dumbledore as like crazy sort of thing
Yeah,
to sort of
exactly.
quash the Voldemort rumors.
Mm.
And we kind of like see it at school and stuff like that as well, where like Harry's classmates don't really believe him anymore.
Yeah, that's
Some
right.
of them kind of start to turn on him a little bit.
Yeah,
So
and
in order,
also that we're also this is for the first time where I think people start thinking that like this is dangerous now.
yeah,
I think this is the first time where like people start to think that this is actually going to affect us in the real life. So it does become a bit more real and grounded in that way.
yeah. And in order to kind of combat that, Dumbledore kind of has to start a secret organization, which he calls the Order of the Phoenix, which use Sirius's house as headquarters. So it kind of
Mm-hmm.
reintroduces him into this movie again,
Mm-hmm.
and he's sort of useful, so they bring him back into the fold. And it's this organization of like secret wizards that are kind of banding together in order to fight him. Like they fought him last time, and they're kind of trying to do so again. you see like a photo of them, and like the vast majority of them from the old organization are like dead now.
They're dead, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
because Voldemort has kind of wiped through them, but there's still like the remnants of them left.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of get together to fight them. At Hogwarts, however, the Ministry starts to even interfering there because they don't want Dumbledore to have any control. So they introduce like a teacher that's from the Ministry, um, and they kind of start to discredit him from the
Right.
inside, and they start interfering with like teaching at Hogwarts.
Mm-hmm.
And the character that they introduce now, you and I have spoken about for the last few weeks about the word bitch and about how
Yeah.
we're thinking that it might be like derogatory towards women, so maybe
Well,
we
people
shouldn't.
might find that offensive. Yeah.
So maybe we shouldn't be using it. If anyone should be called a bitch, it's Dolores Umbridge.
Umbridge, yeah, that's right. She pretty much exemplifies it, doesn't she? She is evil.
She is a bitch.
Absolute fucking
In every fucking sense of the word. She's almost
yeah.
worse than Voldemort in some ways. She's probably one of the greatest villains that you just fucking like hate.
Hate.
The character is just like really, really good, I think.
Yeah. You're right. I guess that was yeah, that was J K Rowling writing a character that was just, it's kind of like Joffrey from Game of Thrones, isn't it? Someone that's like the perfect antagonist. Like there's no, sometimes it's good to have an antagonist that you're like, oh, I can understand where they're coming from, but particularly for like Umbridge, it's good for them that this is like the bad character. This is the evil, and it's like it's kind of a slow burn though, like she's kind of like prissy and like kind of very ladylike, where you're like, but and it's somehow, I don't even know how, it's like a subconscious thing. It's like that there's something wrong with her, and then like as the movie goes on, the darker things just start getting introduced, and she's fucking like making, yeah, like she starts instilling like her rules in the school and stuff like that, and as you said, the
Yeah.
influence starts creeping in, and you realize the like malevolence of this bitch.
And all the while this is happening, another annoyingly relatable thing happens to Harry, where
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden he starts having like mental health issues, and because he's feeling kind of isolated, he's feeling like alone and scared. His friends are kind of turning on him a little bit. So the movie kind of goes through this little period through the first half of the film where Harry kind of feels like alone, and Dumbledore's not speaking to him either. So he's going through this sort of mental health period where he's kind of
That's
reflecting,
right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and he's like he's in like the age of like puberty, where like a lot of teenagers are going through these sort of like problems where they
Mm-hmm.
feel like they're the only one dealing with the things they're dealing with, and they feel like they can't talk to anyone. And it's like another element of like Harry's personality that's just so relatable for like the normal person, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's actually like depressive episodes, but it's never explicit. It's like, it's not like they'll say Harry was feeling depressed that day type of thing. You'll like see in the course of like this year at his school that he was like in a somewhat depressive state, and like, it's probably most clearly exemplified with like the relationship with his friends. I think I'm unfortunately, for Order of the Phoenix, I can't remember a huge amount of details for, but I remember there being strains, particularly in like Grimwald's place, when it came to people trusting each other and stuff like that, where it was kind
Yeah,
of introduced for the first time.
and I never really noticed that this was like happening when I was reading or watching the books or the film.
Mm-hmm.
But once they introduce the Umbridge character, the character from the Ministry, um, Harry and Umbridge kind of almost had to have a fight like between them. There's like a war going on within Hogwarts, and Harry's kind of leading the charge from his side, and she's leading the charge from the Ministry, and it kind of almost perfectly shadows the Dumbledore Voldemort dynamic that's like going on, and it's almost like training Harry for Voldemort. Like
Definitely,
Harry
yeah.
creates his own Order of the Phoenix, and
Exactly,
and
yeah.
he even fucking calls it Dumbledore's army.
Yeah.
Like he basically does everything that Dumbledore does to fight Voldemort, except he's training like students to do it,
Mm,
and he's doing so against a foe that isn't quite as formidable as Voldemort, but is like still
serious.
almost insurmountable for him at the time, sort
Yeah.
of thing.
Yeah, it's not only just like a foe he's fighting, he's actually fighting like a regime,
Yeah,
that's being instilled on the people, that's like fucking uh, maybe fascist. I'll need to maybe not, but it's clearly bad, and it's for me, it's the first, is it the first opportunity? I suppose it's probably, yeah, the first opportunity in which Harry is taught how to be like a leader. You know, he's taught like it's not just him going against the bad guy now. It's people rallying behind him because of his like force of personality and his experience with the dark art. And people are like, people start believing him. It's like this guy actually has fought the Dark Lord. You know, we need to
Oh yeah.
fucking like you know. So it becomes. I suppose it's kind of like the first times where he becomes a character that others start really looking up to in that regard.
Yeah, I think when he starts to convince his classmates that he's actually done all these things, like he's fought Voldemort like 3 times at this
Yeah,
stage, and
exactly.
he's
Yeah.
he's managed to make it out with his life every single time, and he like admits how lucky he is and how he's had all the right tools to like do it in the moment, but they're all still like, yeah, but you've escaped
But you've done it.
Voldemort, yeah,
Yeah,
you've
sure.
done it now, sort of
Yeah.
thing,
Uh-huh.
and they see it when he starts like teaching them the dark arts as well because this kid clearly knows what he's doing, sort of thing.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He is good at it, doesn't he? I
Yeah,
never
so
thought
he,
of that
he
before.
he has this like weird dynamic with Umbridge that mirrors the problem that he has with Voldemort, but it's almost like a stepping stone to that,
Mm-hmm.
which I'd never thought about, and it seems like really good storytelling now that I have thought about it. And
Mm.
another example of why J K Rowling like writes a really good story. You know, there might be holes in it, but I think the way that she tells the story is like really really good.
Yeah, I suppose so. It was a good first antagonist. You know, it was like a baby step towards Voldemort at the end of the day. I think it's like I think what we're talking about here is these are not complex writing techniques. You know, I think in like a long
No,
series of books, like this is something that is like almost formulaic. It's just that it's done in a setting with characters that really capture your imagination and make you feel for them. That's the good thing about this. You know, I still don't think I really don't think it's like it's hard to describe why Harry Potter is so effective. It really is, but I just don't think it's because J.K. Rowling was particularly even inspired at world building. I swear to you, man. But I'm not trying to say it's not good. I'm not trying to say that it's really, really good. I'm just saying that there are many, many other books out there that do an equally good job. It's 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 an interesting one, but to get back to what you're saying, yeah, this idea of introducing one character for them to deal with the first baby step was a brilliant move, and especially there's such a contrast as well between Umbridge and Voldemort. It wasn't exact, like it wasn't like you know Umbridge was mini Voldemort. He was a really powerful spellcaster that he had to outwit in a duel type of thing. It was like a completely different problem that he had to approach and figure out how you deal with this adversary.
yeah, I think you're right when you say that it wasn't a particularly unformulaic like story. It is definitely something that's been tried and tested. Like I said at
Mm-hmm.
the start, you know,
Yeah.
it is the same story that we've seen a million times. I think it's probably just told really well, and I could say the same for like the original Star Wars. I think
Yeah,
when
yeah, yeah.
you've got like Luke and Darth Vader, I don't think this is a particularly unique storyline, but it's just told in a way that kind of manages to capture the audience, sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
which is what Harry Potter seems to have caught on to as well. However, it's done it, it's managed it. Um, so after he manages to deal with Umbridge, eventually Voldemort kind of rears his head again towards the end of the movie, and we see this like really epic showdown between Dumbledore and Voldemort when they kind of come to blows together, and there's this like epic duel. Now, when you spoke about dueling earlier, I was thinking I was agreeing with what you were saying about how it seems like that, and when I think about how dueling goes, how it kind of scales, I think about it as like, yeah, it can be like a gunslinger, like whoever's fastest in the draw kind of wins. But I also think that the spells that they learn at school are probably the spells that Dumbledore and Voldemort still use, but they've just like mastered them
I
on like
remember
a
we talked about
level
that before. Yeah.
a level that like Harry can only scarcely imagine. So you know when Dumbledore summons the water, for example, like Harry knows how to lift water with his wand, but Dumbledore does such a volume and such a force
Mm-hmm.
that's like just like unthinkable. It's
Yeah,
like they've mastered the spells.
and when Voldemort moves the glass, that's just like a high tier version of like Wingardium Leviosa. That's just extremely
Sure.
complex levitation magic, but it's the same concept. I completely agree with you. I think that like what we see in dueling in like the second movie is like it's like that's probably how most duels work in this world. It's just that see when you come to like the tier of wizard of like Voldemort and Dumbledore, because we need to remember these are the best in the world. Then like the ability to know, you know, if they cast that spell, I cast this spell, and like the whole aspect of being quicker. that just kind of falls apart. Instead, it becomes more an issue of like incapacitating your enemy, right? It's stopping them from casting spells that can counter your spells. It's because that's what that whole fight is. It's just like throwing something so they have to deal with a defense, and then you have to be imaginative enough to figure out how to apply a spell in your repertoire to deal with that. And it was such
Exactly.
it was a great example, I think, of high level magic. I wish that was a type of like, I don't know whether a huge amount of thought was put into that fight scene, but I wish that type of magic was how the rest of the magic system was incorporated for every other movie. You know, like it was basic concepts, and it was your ability to be imaginative and manipulate them that
Skillful
made
enough to apply them, yeah.
exactly that made your skill, as opposed to just having an answer in the form of a particular spell to a particular situation.
So I actually think that the movies do a particularly bad job of showing you how the wizards around Harry are actually quite powerful. So that all the wizards in the Order of the Phoenix,
Mm.
I believe, are actually quite powerful magical users. But the movies do a really bad job at showing you that these aren't just average wizards. You know, and there's like a duel in like the last movie where it's like Ron's mum and one of the dark wizards, and they kind of go backwards and forwards, and it's like a really basic sort of like fling a spell, like try and block a spell, and
Sure.
eventually one of them gets like frozen and then killed, and it's like nothing on the level of like what Dumbledore and Voldemort were doing. They were doing something that
No.
was like completely above that, and
Yeah.
that is good how they're showcasing the difference in power between them like that. But you're right. I think most duels are pretty much like throw a couple of spells. So eventually, somebody will do two spells too quickly for the other, and then the duel will be over, sort of thing.
Right. Right. Yeah. It is a completely different battlefield we're talking about here with like Dumbledore and Voldemort. Completely different, and as well as like it's like every spell we see in the movie is like literally, you know, like a little fucking lightning bolt. It's like a fucking phaser type of thing they're firing at each other, and like once that effect gets there, it does something. We don't see anything like that when it comes to like Dumbledore and Voldemort. Not only that, they also don't speak the entire time. You know, this is just them manipulating it. Like I don't even understand how that works in terms of like the lore, and whether you just need to have a deeper understanding to do that or what. But it was a completely different scale, and I like that actually. The idea of these two being like peerless fighters was brilliant. I think that was my favorite scene actually, probably in Harry Potter.
It's also the first point in which you think to yourself, "Okay, Dumbledore's actually the shit." You know, because
Oh sure,
you've
yeah,
heard it
yeah.
up to this point. You've heard, Voldemort's scared of that guy, and you're like, "Oh, he looks pretty
Why?
old. He looks pretty
Yeah,
old to me." And
yeah.
then it gets to that fight, and it's like they're going blow for blow, and it's like, "Oh, actually, like." Because Voldemort he outclasses everybody else in the world to the point where he's not bothered about it. And I actually personally think that Voldemort is more powerful than Dumbledore. And we'll speak about that later on.
Okay, okay.
But um, it's the fact that Voldemort's like, this guy will give me a good fight.
Mm,
That's the scary bit for Voldemort, because nobody else will give him a good fight. And
mm.
this guy, there's like, maybe Voldemort doesn't think Dumbledore will beat him. Voldemort probably thinks that he is more powerful than Dumbledore,
But it
but
won't
it's
be a
like
walkover.
maybe 70-30, which is closer
Right.
than anybody else comes. So
Yeah.
that's the reason that Voldemort's kind of like apprehensive about it.
I think that it's one of those scenarios in which, like, if they were just put in a room, the two of them, and they were just like facing each other on equal ground and footing, you know, we're probably right. Voldemort would win, but like
I think there's
Dumbledore,
no doubt, actually.
yeah, you're probably right. But it's like it's Dumbledore's intelligence and wisdom that gives him like the edge in these certain situations, and the way that
Sure.
he's able to read the dynamics and know when to like commence the battle, that type of thing. That's what makes him the genius that he is.
Sure.
And it's funny. It's because it's I don't think that that's really commented on in the books at all, but it's the impression you just realize. It's
Uh,
something you almost pick up on. It's like how they're powerful in different ways.
yeah, it definitely seems to me that Voldemort is like more raw power,
Yeah,
and Dumbledore has a better repertoire as like a person, as a wizard. I would say
exactly. Yeah.
that's probably how I see it anyway.
Mm.
So Voldemort's return is kind of the second arc that I see in the three arcs that exist in Harry Potter. So that at the end of the fifth movie, the Minister for Magic kind of comes in and he sees Voldemort, and he's actually like, oh, he is back, and it's almost like, he didn't believe it before. He was actually denying it because he thought it was false, and now he's like, oh, he actually is back,
Holy shit.
realizes the truth,
Hmm.
and that kind of like rounds off Voldemort's return because he's no longer in the shadows. You know, he's no longer like
He's
everyone
at
knows
large
after
now.
that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's like this guy's actually back, and we can't kind of run away from that anymore. So this is a sort of like darker turn for the movies that kind of it uses the first two movies as like a springboard to like introduce the real story and the real conflict of the franchise, where the
Hmm.
first two movies kind of set it up, and then the following three movies showcase Voldemort's return and show you why you should be worried about him and why Harry kind of doesn't stand a chance at the moment, sort of thing.
Okay. Hmm.
So we move on to the Half Blood Prince at that point, and Voldemort's now so he's operating in the open, and he's kind of killing people at will now, and no one's able to stop him really. And the only really safe place is Hogwarts at this point
Seems
because
that way.
because like Dumbledore's the
He's
head
there,
because
exactly.
he's
Yeah.
the headmaster there.
Yeah.
So that seems to be the only place that's really safe. So people aren't. I think they're worried about sending their kids to Hogwarts, but they're also like, well, Dumbledore's there, so
Sure. Yeah.
they can still go. They can still go, kind of thing.
Hmm.
But this is where we start to see Dumbledore kind of playing a little bit of chess, and he introduces
Mm.
Harry to the game, where he's like, okay, we need to now start making moves against Voldemort because he's now back. We need to have a strategy to like beat him. So in this movie, Dumbledore starts to introduce like private lessons to Harry, where he starts like teaching him about Voldemort's past and about his history.
Hmm.
He doesn't teach him
Hmm.
spells or anything like that, but starts to talk about how Voldemort has become the kind of the person that he is now, in order
Mm.
to give Harry a little bit of like insight. So you kind of see
Yeah.
a little bit of his backstory, which is like kind of cool, you know.
Very cool. Very cool. Uh-huh.
It definitely seems like throughout the movies that the things that are cool and the things that should be cool, like they're really cool. You know, they're kind
Right.
of
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
big, massive like set pieces, and the things everything seems to live up to the hype in this movie, which
Mm.
is rare in a film franchise, right?
You're probably right. Yeah, I hadn't ever thought about that before, but it does. It's for me, like Half Blood Prince is my favorite movie actually. Out of them all, and I think it does a great job in so many aspects. But in terms of, excuse me, yeah, in terms of Voldemort, I'd forgotten actually about the private lessons. I was remembering more about how you start learning about like the deeper connection between Harry and Voldemort. You
Sure.
start realizing that like their fates are actually intertwined, and you're talking about getting like a backstory about Voldemort, but that's also where I was just thinking like he also goes to like the occlumancy. He goes to the private lessons with Snape as well as Dumbledore. So he's like an
Occlumency, yeah.
occlumancy. There we go. And he also learns a little bit about Snape's past as well. So like you have like a lot of. I think actually Half the Prince is an extremely character driven movie. It's because well, I'm sure we'll mention them in a while, but you also have like a bunch of like pivotal relationships that form from this movie and that continue throughout it as well. I think The Half Blood Prince is an amazing movie in terms of showing us how these characters are kind of maturing.
Yeah, so at the very start of the movie, Dumbledore takes Harry to try and recruit a teacher, an old teacher, and he makes it pretty clear that there's an ulterior motive
Yeah.
for him coming back to Hogwarts, but doesn't really tell Harry what it is at the moment, but tells him that Harry's going to need to befriend him because he loves famous wizards.
Yeah.
And Harry's pretty much the most famous wizard you can
On
get.
Earth. Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right though. I feel like this is very much, although it's Harry Potter, this movie is very much about Snape, about the teacher that Harry hates, and it's very much about how his story is explained because as it turns out he is in fact the Half Blood Prince. So the movie's kind of named after him, and
Hmm.
it is his movie, and he's revealed to be this like massive piece on the
Yeah. Yeah.
chessboard.
That's right. Hmm.
So as the movie goes on, Harry and Dumbledore eventually sort of befriend this new teacher, and it turns out he's got a key memory, a conversation he had with Voldemort that might give them some key information in which they will need to defeat him.
Hmm.
So Harry eventually he wins the liquid luck from a competition that he has in class one day. He uses it and he manages to get this memory from Slughorn. But let's just
Hmm.
take a moment and speak about liquid luck then.
Oh my god, I fucking hate Liquid Luck. I think it's far worse than Time Turners, man. Far worse than Time Turners. Like
It's bad. You're right.
it's the excuse is in the movie that it's pretty tough to make. That's it. But
Well,
it can make you
so
it can
there's
turn you into a
also
god.
there's also I think I can't
Rare
specifically remember
ingredients or
what the reference was, but there's also a reference to you can't keep taking it over and over and over again because something happens, and I can't remember what
oh
it is.
really? Right. I
Yeah,
wasn't aware of that. But like But what I'm even saying for is just like, just leave it for high days and holidays. Like every single exam you're going to walk into, you'd probably sit for the exam, right? If you've got a big day at work coming, you'd do that. If you're like, knew you're going to fight Voldemort that day, you'd probably take a wee swig of it, that type of thing. Like
Yeah.
it's like, it's gold. This stuff's more valuable than gold by so many degrees. Like Harry's just able to literally walk around the school and by chance bumps into everyone he needs to bump into and say the perfect things to them in order to get him to do exactly what he wants them to do. And it's like they're given again, it's a scenario of them just giving them to this like the fucking school kids, Like he literally gives out a performance enhancing drug to school kids because
Yeah,
he
yeah.
fucking made this potion, and that's even another thing. And the potion they were making was called Liquid Death, right? It's like, what the fuck are you teaching these kids, man? It's like, yeah, the potion aspect is bizarre, and then you find out there's such a thing as a love potion. It's like, oh, seriously, crazy how overpowered these things are. The only way in my mind in which I can justify them existing is if they required raw components that were exceedingly expensive or rare. Like if Liquid Luck required a dragon's tooth or something like that, I don't fucking know, but like that would be understandable. I hate how that has been implemented in this movie. Absolutely hate it.
Right. Three things before we go forward. Okay, yes, they are making the draft of the Living Death at the beginning of that movie, but that's basically just poison. We can do that today, so it's not. That's
You don't
not
teach
too...
us that in high school.
No, that's true. This is Hogwarts, man. Okay, we'll have to skip over that one. That one's not too unrealistic. That's not too unrealistic. Second one,
Okay.
yes, there is a love potion, but it's clearly explained in the movies and in the books that it doesn't actually create love. It just creates the effect of infatuation.
It's an infatuation potion. Sure. Okay.
Yeah. And I think, third of all, I think the degree of like skill that's required to make Liquid Luck is extremely high. I agree with you that it is nonsense. It's nonsense that this thing isn't like bottled and sold for like a ridiculous price and that like people don't have access to it. It is very strange.
Yeah.
It's another thing that I think J K Rowling has like introduced and like hasn't thought through, and it's like time travel. It's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, it is a little bit of like nonsense. I think it's another thing where the movie's kind of like, this is really difficult to make. You have to be a master sort of potion artist to like make it in the first place.
Sure.
And then second of all, it's like you can't take it all the time. I think like when you're talking about exams and that, if a student was to like Liquid Luck's like so powerful, if they were to take it during exams, they would get all the questions right, like 100% of the questions, every single one of them.
I don't think that's how it works. It's because they'd be lucky enough to get away with it as well. They'd get the correct number wrong to make it believable. Like the luck gets you what you want. It's not fallible.
That's an interesting theory.
Yeah, I think it's too good for that. At least that's the impression I got anyway when I was watching the movies. You could be right that it would like give itself away, but if it was, then it wouldn't be very Liquid lucky. It'd be kind of.
I guess so. It also wears off though. It's not like a long lasting thing.
Yeah,
it only lasts
exactly.
24 hours. So you're
Just a long.
Your paper
time.
gets marked after that, so it's out with its jurisdiction. That's how I'm justifying it to myself anyway.
Okay, I'm sure I get where you're coming from. Yeah, but like that's the thing. Like, which you're saying it's like really hard to make, and you can't take it very often. It's like sure those are somewhat like they do curb its ability a little bit, but it's like every Malfoy would have a potion of that on their person at all times.
Yeah, everyone would use it at least once in their life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, but that's the thing. Like rich people, I don't know what sort of time frame you're not allowed to use it over, but they would have it on them in case they need it.
I think the effects are compounding. So
oh really?
After you've taken it once, it's like I think that's how it works. I can't remember anymore. I'm in the middle of reading the books. I'll tell you when I get to it.
Okay.
But,
yeah, that would actually that would be a good.
Although that was probably one of the deterrents that J K Rowling came up with after people started asking questions, though, I'd imagine.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, Liquid Luck, it's a joke.
They go through this movie. Harry takes the Liquid Luck. He manages to get the memory from Slughorn, and they find out that Voldemort has been creating these things called Horcruxes. So he's been splitting up parts of his soul, and he's been hiding it in objects. And the lessons that Dumbledore is teaching Harry kind of shows him the kind of objects that Voldemort would choose, the kind of places that he would hide them, sort of thing. So it ends up being a really good lesson on his like personality because it kind of tells Harry where to look.
Right, exactly.
And Dumbledore also informs him that he has in fact found one. He thinks he knows where one is. So he takes Harry to it, he brings him with him, and they manage to eventually find it. Now the trials that they have to go through to get to it are like severe.
Oh
And
yeah.
the only reason that Harry's able to survive it is because Dumbledore's there. So it sets up the scenario where it's like, okay, this is going to be like a really, really hard thing. Lucky we've got Dumbledore. And then
Mhm.
they go back to Hogwarts and Snape kills him. So
Yeah, that was the biggest moment of this fucking series. I can still remember that. What was that? Primary six for us. I can still remember people talking about it in our classroom. Like fucking, yeah. I remember it was spoiled for me as well, but it was shocking, man,
yeah,
shocking.
because
And
we're kind of given the impression that Snape's was a bad guy, but is now a good guy, and Dumbledore like inherently trusts him. And
yeah,
then it gives you the impression that Snape actually has been double crossing Dumbledore the whole time.
yeah.
And
Dumbledore's been duped, type of thing.
yeah, exactly. Which is
Mm.
like it's like mental. And all of a
Yeah,
sudden, the protector of the realm is
gone.
dead,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
exactly. And that
it's time
Horcrux
to
as
start
well.
withdrawing your kids from school.
Yeah, right, yeah, yeah, but that's the thing as well. You know, you're saying like the only reason Harry was able to destroy that Horcrux was with like Dumbledore's help. The only reason that Dumbledore was able to do it was because Harry was there as well. He wouldn't have been able to solo that. These are like
No,
impossible challenges, and we're given like a taste of that, and then he's gone. You know, it's fucking scary, man. And that's also where we find out about Malfoy as well, because he's been on his arc throughout the entire movie with like the vanishing cabinets, and
yep.
he's been trying to like we find out he's had these assassination attempts against Voldemort because I think his dad is in Azkaban at this point, so like he's basically he's like chosen by Dumbledore to be his almost like a right hand man, and in
Voldemort.
yeah. God, I don't know what I have a problem with those two names, but yeah, he's like chosen to be like the right hand man in Hogwarts, and he's given this like probably like an impossible task. I don't think
Yeah.
Voldemort
Oh,
ever expected Malfoy to actually kill Dumbledore. It was almost like an
no, I don't
impossible
think so.
task, but it was given to him nonetheless. And he was also this is where we also find out that Snape. We start realizing that Snape's actually a double crosser because he makes the unbreakable vow with Malfoy's mum in order to help him along the way. So like that was
Yeah.
a great arc we see because like you know how you said like in like previous movie we start seeing that like Harry's going through some real difficulties and like kind of like troubled and stuff like that. Well, like we see like almost like a parallel in Malfoy here because he like
We
becomes
see a
really
nervous breakdown.
yeah, oh
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's more than just depression. You're right because he like becomes like ostracized from people. He starts like being able to contact with them, and you see the stress building up, and there's like more and more pressure being put on him to fulfill this goal, and this goal is killing Dumbledore. You know, like it's cruel what happens to fucking poor Malfoy in this movie, and in the very end, where he has the opportunity to kill Dumbledore, he like freezes, and he doesn't even manage it in the end. It's Snape that does it. So I
Yeah.
really like that whole arc that he has in this movie. I really like the Vanishing
It
Cabinet thing.
almost like because he's been a one-dimensional character up to this point, where it's like,
Right?
oh, he's just
Yeah.
a fucking bad guy, and then all of a sudden, it's like he's thrust into this bad world, and it's like actually he's probably, despite the fact he's in Slytherin house and his dad's a Death Eater, it's like he's not actually in this. You know, he's like he's actually got a bit of good inside him.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of it really showcases like a sort of third dimension to his character,
Mm. I
where
think you see.
it's kind of like he's been born into this world and it's been influenced upon him, but he's not really actually into it, sort of thing.
Yeah. His heart's not in it. You do see for the first time how he's a victim. You know, he's like a bully. He's a bad character, but he's not evil. You know, he doesn't. He's not doing this because he's getting a kick out of it. He's doing this because of the expectations. So that was just very very grim. His entire arc in that movie. So I love what they do with Malfoy in this movie. That was a great. I also if we can move on from there, another thing to talk about as well is like Ron's relationship with Lavender, and like
Sure.
and how that continues on into like the relationship with Hermione, because like this is the first time you see like love interests become pretty well. You know, I suppose like Harry's already had his thing with Chen
Cho Chang.
Cho Chang, and but you start seeing it in the case of like Hermione a little bit here, and as with Ron, because he like has a whole thing with Lavender, and it's like smitten, you know, it's like first love type of thing, you know, and you eventually realize that oh yeah, you eventually realize that Ron actually does feel for Hermione, right? And
I think
Hermione finds out.
this movie's actually deceptively funny as well. There are a lot of like funny moments in this film for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but they seem to sort of go with the theme of the movie.
You're right.
Where
What
it's
is it?
like, yeah, there is this like teen drama going on in the background, but it's like you fancy each other, and it's like they're trying to deal with like Voldemort, but it's like, but do you like me?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I know that was great. I totally forgotten about that as well. Wasn't this also? This was the movie where like Harry actually confides in Hermione about he like loves Ginny. You know, like, this is the
Aye.
first time where it actually comes out. So it's like so much about this movie in terms of just like the relationship building was really good for me. I enjoyed a lot of that.
That's also another like annoyingly relatable, likable thing about Harry is that like see when he's happy, when he's not. There are multiple points during the franchise where he's like upset or he's sad about something, but when Harry's like happy and he's like content and some things are like moving in a good direction for him, he's a fucking funny character. Like there are
Yeah.
things that Harry does are just like funny.
Quirky shit. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
right enough.
exactly. Like when he's on the liquid luck, that whole scene is like quite hilarious actually.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It's quite bizarre, you know. I just becomes this different person. I hadn't thought about that actually. You're right. It's quite a funny movie. Remember, it even starts with Fred and George in their joke shop. You know, like it even sets that from. Isn't that right? Because like they've left Hogwarts by now and they've set up in Diagon Alley. So
Yeah.
like it even sets up with like the joke shop from the very beginning. It is there's quite a lot of light stuff in this movie, which does kind of contrast some of the darker stuff. Because as I said, like you said, sorry, like we have this teenage drama story going on, but then occasionally it'll cut to like Malfoy, who's like ripping his hair out because he thinks he's going to get fucking killed or something. He's going to lose his family or some shit like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really, really like this movie. I think it does a lot of things really well, which is so bizarre as well. It's because it's so late into the series now. It's like,
It's so well paced and like the themes, even though they're like opposite of each other, they work so well together, they mesh all well together. Like at one point he's at the party in Slughorn's office and then he follows Malfoy and he's like
yeah,
getting a lecture from Snape because he's taking on too much stress, and it's like it totally shifts the focus, but it works somehow. I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah.
You're right. This is my favorite film as well.
Right.
All eight of them by
Really?
far. I think it's really good.
That's a good point actually. Yeah.
So Snape kills Dumbledore. At this point, Hogwarts is no longer safe. You know,
Sure.
it would be crazy for Harry to come back next year. He can't. You know, Voldemort's gonna walk in next year and he's gonna fucking murder Harry straight up.
Exactly.
If he stays, like, there's
he can't turn up.
Yeah, at the end of the movie, Harry's like, okay, I'll let you and Ron know. Like, to Hermione, he's like, I'll let you and Ron know where I'm going. And she's like, nah, we're coming with you, sort of thing. So it kind of sets up the last two movies. And I realized when I was thinking about this that the last two movies are sort of ingenious in the way that they set up a series of mini adventures that really use the world that's been built to host. And I'll relate it back to D&D once again.
I was going to say it's like D&D, isn't it? Yeah.
So in D&D, you can have like small adventures, which are known as like one-shots, which is like a 4-hour small contained story that can be a hell of a lot of fun and not like a long form thing.
Mm-hmm.
J K Rowling kind of does that with the main places in the Harry Potter world.
Right.
Like she takes them to the Ministry where they have like a small adventure to get a Horcrux and destroy it. She takes them to Gringotts, where they have a small adventure to get a Horcrux and destroy it. Then she takes them to Hogwarts, where they have a small adventure to get a Horcrux to destroy it. It's like this series of like boom, boom, boom areas where like, okay, now we have to like ramp up, finish this story. And it's like adventure, great adventure, adventure, great adventure, adventure, great adventure, one after the other, you know, and it's like constantly going all the time. While also giving you this impression that it's happening over like a really long period of time because their relationships are starting to get really strained, you know?
Yeah. It also like that's the thing. As much as it's adventure after adventure, like you are getting the impression that like they're being like they are following a breadcrumb through all of this and finding out where they need to go. Is because for a lot of like it feels somewhat directionless. Like the guys, the crew, they've been given this like legendary Herculean task by Dumbledore. You know, they're asked to find the Horcruxes. Like he's only managed to find a couple of them, and he's only been able to destroy one of them. You know, like this is it's crazy, and it's like it's clear as well that they like if Harry had went on his own, he would not have found one of them. You know,
no,
it would have been impossible. He needed all three of them to do this to be working together. But at the same time, exactly, like it's such a stressful, horrible event, and they're living under such like they're fugitives, you know, and it's like they start to cracks form within like the triad.
Yeah, and I never noticed this before either, but I've just thought about it just now.
Mm-hmm.
When the three of them are together and they leave, they're constantly formulating plans. They're figuring out where to go next.
Yeah.
And when they start cracking, when they get a Horcrux and it starts to affect all of them,
Mm-hmm.
when they start cracking, that's when they stagnate. And eventually Ron leaves, and Harry and Hermione make like no progress without him.
That's right. Yeah,
And it's
they
not
need
until
them.
it's the night that Ron comes back that they find the sword and they destroy another Horcrux. So it's like it does a good job at showing you how like all three of them are like kind of needed. Like Harry needs both of his friends to go on and like do this journey. But we have like this really bleak world now where Voldemort's like not hiding. He's not like the Minister for Magic or anything like that. He doesn't need that. But he's the puppet
He's out there.
master
Sure.
of the entire world now.
Mm-hmm.
So the seventh book and the seventh two films introduce these items known as the Deathly Hallows, which are basically these uber powerful magical items.
Yeah, artifacts. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and if you have all three of them, you're basically the master of death. There's the most powerful wand in the world, the Resurrection Stone, which brings back people from the dead, and the Invisibility Cloak, which coincidentally Harry has because his ancestor created it.
Yeah, because he's Harry, remember?
Yeah, yeah, it's another thing that Harry just fucking has because he needs it,
Yeah.
But not Dumbledore, sorry, Voldemort is chasing the Elder Wand, and this comes back to the duel earlier where I said I think it's pretty clear that Voldemort is more powerful than Dumbledore, because it turns out Dumbledore is actually the owner of the Elder Wand and has been for decades.
Yeah.
And he can't beat Voldemort, and this wand is really hyped up to be something that really gives you an edge. It really increases your power, and it's like, don't even fight someone with this because you can't.
Yeah.
And it's like Dumbledore can't even beat Voldemort with this wand, which is why I think it's so obvious that Voldemort is clearly way more powerful than Dumbledore is.
I guess you're right. I hadn't thought about that. But, I mean, I never got the impression that Dumbledore was trying to kill Voldemort either, and also like he's because there's kind of like a fact that like we're told that up until like the Elder Wand itself has like a brutally bloody history because like everyone's constantly going after it. Like Dumbledore, he's able to hold on to it for many decades, and that's because he doesn't have that. He isn't negatively influenced the way that previous users are. He has like the wisdom or the self-restraint or whatever it is in order to use it intelligently, and like when he's fighting Voldemort is trying to kill Dumbledore. I didn't get the impression that Dumbledore was trying to do the same. He was just trying to incapacitate Voldemort, so it's I agree with you that I think Voldemort is more powerful, but I guess yeah, I hadn't thought about that. The fact that he had the Elder Wand and how that affected their dynamic.
You're correct when you say that the wand has like a really bloody history, but I don't think the reason the wand has a bloody history is because the wand demands killing or the wand demands power or anything like that.
No,
the reason it has a bloody history is because it's so powerful and it's so sought after.
Yeah,
I don't think there's anything about the wand that like. I think it just enhances. Like, I think Dumbledore is like fully utilizing the wand when he has it. I don't think there's anything about Dumbledore that's like not able to use the wand, if you know what I mean.
I wasn't insinuating that the wand demands blood. I was more meaning that like the power rush you get makes most people with the wand do more dueling and want more power, and like that basically inadvertently draws attention to themselves. Like people didn't know. Well, very few people knew that Dumbledore had the Elder Wand, right? Like, it wasn't like he was well known for using it for kicking people's ass. Like, he managed to keep it relatively on the DL, and that was through, like, intelligent use of it, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he had, like, complete mastery and control of it. I'm not trying to say otherwise. I just think that he was probably... He didn't have, like, the bloodthirstiness that most people that try to acquire this wand
definitely
had.
No.
Which is where I think the conflict comes from, I suppose.
Yeah, so Voldemort's kind of trying to... That's his kind of main goal throughout the first of these two movies.
Yeah,
and
right.
Obviously it was split up into two movies because that was popular at the time for some reason.
Yeah.
Just to get as much money as you could out of the last movie, I guess.
It's somewhat warranted, man. I didn't think that the Deathly Hallows were an example of movies that didn't need to be broken up. Like, for instance, like The Hobbit, Catching Fire, these are movies which were unnecessarily broken up, and they were...
Sure.
But Deathly Hallows Part 2, Made sense.
I think you could merit that the fifth and the sixth book could also be broken up into two movies. So I
Sure,
think
sure.
the only reason it was done is because it was the last one. You know,
And
I
they
think you're right.
realize, yeah,
You're
they're
right.
not
It
going
does
to make
work.
any more money.
They do work on their own though. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
So things look pretty bleak as Voldemort starts to like take over the Ministry, and the Muggleborns start to be like rounded up. They start to sort of enact their policies, and they start to sort of persecute people. Then we watch the trio go through these three amazing adventures in areas that we haven't really fully explored yet. We know they
Yeah.
exist and we know they're amazing, but then they go into one of the deepest vaults in Gringotts, and the levels of protection that you have to go through to get to it, that seems impossible. They need like a goblin off the bank to even manage to get through it, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like charm magic is completely ineffectual against these guys because it does raise a good question. It's like, how do you securely protect a vault in a world with wizards that have spells that can let you do anything, you know? And
Yeah,
I think it does a pretty good example, a not bad example of like how you can overcome these. It's like, you know, for instance, like you know how like there's that waterfall. What's the idea is that gets rid of any illusions. It like negates illusion magic. I think using a waterfall to negate illusion magics might be somewhat contrived. I think like just a magical field or something as you enter the door might make more sense. But I still think it was I guess a pretty good example of some of the defenses you'd put in place
I think
for
it's an idea
wizards.
of like the levels of protection that they offer. The deeper the vault is into Gringotts, so like
Yeah,
as the deeper you go into the bank, the more protection there is, you know, and of the vault. Like there's like a dragon outside of
yeah.
the
There's
vault
literally a fucking
vault
dragon.
they go to, you know. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
once you get to like a really deep level of Gringotts, there's like an extreme protection there.
Hmm.
So they go into these areas. They go into the infiltrate the Ministry. They infiltrate Gringotts, and they might have to go back to Hogwarts at the end. And it's eventually revealed that it turns out Harry's been having he has this connection with Voldemort because the night that his parents died, a bit of Voldemort's soul latched itself onto Harry because he was trying to create another Horcrux, but failed in doing so. And when his curse backfired, it kind of latched itself onto Harry. So he's had this part of Voldemort's soul like inside him, and it's why he can do a bunch of stuff. And
Yeah, speak
it's
parcel
why he
stuff.
has this like connection with him. So it turns out that Harry like needs to die
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
order for Voldemort to win. And Voldemort kind of gives him this like ultimatum where he's like, "Come out and face me yourself. Otherwise, I'm gonna like kill every single person in the castle," sort of thing. So Harry goes and Voldemort kills him, and then we have this really strange scene between like Harry and like Dumbledore that's like sort of in the afterlife, but like not really.
I never understood that. Yeah.
I think it's kind of supposed to be in Harry's mind, but
All right.
I'm not exactly sure how the whole situation like shakes out. To be honest with you, it's something that I've never really tried to think about because I don't think it will really make too much sense. It's one of those things that I don't really like actually,
Yeah, no, I don't really
and the
like.
whole thing.
I wouldn't have minded. The weirdest part is just when you see the dying Voldemort fetus thing. It's like if it was just like Harry talking to Dumbledore, that would have been fine, right? It would because you could have just said that would have been just a figment of imagination or some shit like that. But it was a bit weird.
Yeah, and I think the idea is that the killing curse kills the part of Voldemort inside Harry, but doesn't kill Harry at the same time. And I'm not really sure about that either. I haven't.
Yeah, I think it might have
Again,
been J K Rowling bullshit to make the plot move on.
yeah, I haven't really thought about that too hard either.
Yeah,
But
don't worry about
anyway,
it.
Harry kind of comes back, and then he has like this one final showdown where like they've destroyed all the Horcruxes. It's now like 1-on-1. Harry's no longer got any protection. Voldemort's not got any protection anymore, and they kind of go at it. And Harry's kind of at the point now where he's like learned enough. He can smart his way kind of through it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
He kind of he can't beat Voldemort. It's kind of clear, but he manages to use like the connection that the two of them have, and he eventually manages to kill Voldemort. And everything's sort of like happy at the end, and a bunch of people have kind of like died in the process. But
Yeah.
the final showdown kind of comes to its conclusion. The third arc kind of comes to the end, where it's like this sort of like normal boy has moved into this world. This normal kid, which is something like we see everyone can relate to, kind of moves into this
Mm-hmm.
world that has like this great evil. And it's almost like we're talking about with the second movie, where it has the symbolism of this world has like a really dark place, and Harry kind of has to go to the depths of hell, literally has to
Mm.
die, sacrifice himself in order to kind of defeat it. And he kind of comes out at the end kind of stronger, and he's lost a bunch in the process, but he comes out in the end and this really like strong, competent wizard who's kind of solved the problem, and he ends up in the end he ends up getting the virgin. You know, he goes out with Ginny and he gets his family and stuff, and he goes off and lives this kind of like happy life, and it has this like happy ending at the end.
Yeah, yeah.
A part of me wonders what would have happened if J.K. Rowling had ended it badly.
Oh, you mean like a sad ending? Voldemort wins.
Can you imagine? You know,
No.
because it was like by the time the seventh book came out, it was like everyone knew Harry was going to win, right?
Obviously,
Like
yeah, he was the chosen one, right?
the
That
the
was
worst the
abundantly
worst
clear.
that could have possibly happened is like both of them died. You know, that's probably the bad ending that's
Yeah,
possible.
yeah.
But can you imagine if Voldemort had won?
I don't think people. I think that would have been slated. To be honest with you, slated if that happened.
Yeah, I think we're talking about how these like we talk about how Star Wars and how Harry Potter like makes
Uh
fans
huh.
happy.
Uh huh.
I think that good winning probably has to be it's for something this massive.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think it has to happen.
You're right, but I think it's more than that. It's because I think that just the way that these films have been told is kind of like it's it's like we were never led to believe that this was going to be leading to a bad place. You know, there was no foreshadowing of that at all. The movies in general are not dark enough for us to think there's a chance of the good guys
Sure.
losing, right? You know, so you always kind of had a feeling, and I think it had to end that way. I really do. Like if they'd like made Voldemort one, I actually would have been jarring. I think it would have been like, what the fuck just happened there? You know, it's like he's dead after all that. I've just spent the last eight
Yeah.
years watching this shit. You know, like I think it would have been
Yeah.
really fucking really hard done by if that actually happened.
A part of me wonders, no man. Part of me
Oh, it'd be
wonders if
good to
that
see.
had happened. It would be good to know
Yeah,
how that would like shake down. But I think that's like a key tenet and like of making your fans happy and keeping them happy. Like you have to have like a good ending on something of that scale.
yeah. It has to be consistent as with the tone, you know, and
You're right.
it really was. I think it was exactly what we were hoping for without even realizing it. Like you didn't, you when you're watching it, I generally don't think most people when they're watching it, they're like, "Well, Harry's obviously going to live." There is suspense there, and it's done pretty well. And like when he's like in the afterlife, you're like, "Oh shit, Harry's dead," but I think he's taking a Voldemort. But then, like, of course, he ended up not. It ended up just being a completely happy ending, having fucking kids and that, you know. But it was uh, done well. I'm curious though, like particularly for like the film, what do you think of the scene? What they're like all aged by like 20 years and stuff like that, and they have their kids, and like one's called like fucking Albus Black or some. I can't even remember the names, but they're like
Yeah.
stupid as fuck, man.
They're
I
like
hate them.
they're named after like everyone that's died in Harry's life.
Yeah, in like really
They've,
awkward ways, you know.
they've all got like two names each. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Well, you asking what I make of the scene in the movie?
Or both. What do you just think about? What do you think about that in general, like in terms of like the ending in the book and then how it was actually achieved in the film?
Um, I think to be honest, it's a bit unnecessary, isn't it? As a
I think it's
whole,
very unnecessary. Mm.
it's a bit it was kind of fan servicey. To be honest, it's just J.K. Rowling kind of being like, "Oh, this, Harry did well in the end." You know, it's like he's got his kids and his family, and they're all
Yeah,
still
yeah.
happy. Ron and Hermione are happy as well. They got their kids. You know, it's like I don't think anyone needed that. And
No.
in the film especially, I think it just looks so weird that
Oh,
they've tried to age them by 19 years.
yeah, yeah. It's very cringy, right? Like everyone knew that was going to be the result. Everyone knew Harry was going to marry Ginny and have kids. Everyone knew that Ron was going to go with Hermione, and Hermione was going to work for the Ministry for fucking. Like it was cool that they kind of gave us the tidbits. Like Harry became an Auror. I don't know what Ron ended up doing. Did he end up doing anything?
I'm not really sure to be honest, because
No.
I think I try and keep um my like, attraction to the series. I try and keep it to the movies or the books, and I like limit it there because I think as soon as you start doing like spin-offs and as soon as you start like trying to say what they did 20 years later and like when J.K. Rowling's trying to explain things that happened after, I'm just like it just makes it worse. You
Yeah,
know,
it just I don't. It doesn't matter to me.
yeah, the eight movies and the seven books are just like a really nicely contained, great story. And as soon as you start like because it definitely seems to me like everything that's happened since those have ended, like obvious cash grab is obvious sort of thing. Where it's like the movies have now like spawned. To be fair, the movies have spawned like Harry Potter world in like Universal Studios in Florida and like in London, and I think
That's
these are
right.
like great places. But then you've got like the spin-off movies and the Fantastic Beasts series, and then you had the play, and the play, by the way, was absolutely, the story for that was atrocious.
Yeah, I've not seen that,
But they're
but I've
like they're
heard.
properly like cashing in now, and for me, it's just better to look at the movies in like isolation and the books in isolation for the phenomenon that they were. And I think that
Mm.
like great things should really just be left as they are. That's how I like to keep them anyway. And anything that happens after that, I'm just like, you're just ruining it now. Like, just stop, please.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Well, I really believe that like Harry Potter was lightning in a bottle. You know, it was one of those like so unlikely events that was just absolutely perfect. Like if it was brought out today, it wouldn't be the same. If it was brought out 5 years before it, it wouldn't have been the same. It had to happen at that time with those actors, those child actors, end up being amazing for their particular roles. It had to with like they had to involve this world, and it had to be set in 1990s. Like it was just like a really unique combination that ended up making it what it was, and that's the only reason why it's like become this cultural phenomenon. It's not something that we can recreate. If you were to try and do that, it's like it's uncash grabbable. It's never going to work the same way it will as those books, and that's fine. That's better. Wouldn't you rather you had something that was just like a perfect gem that like you'll be able to look back at, and then they're also timeless as well. That's another fucking thing about the movies. But like they're always just yeah, like they're perfect as they are, and I don't want people to keep touching them. And like that, this is where obviously part of our conversation with like Death of the Author, uh, we start talking about it because J K Rowling does have a bit of a habit of adding stuff after she's produced content. You know, like she'll like tell you, oh,
Yeah.
by the way, that, by the way, there's that, by the way, there's that, and like it just cheapens it to me. You know, like if you didn't provide us enough information for that in the initial book, then just let people come up with their own conclusions. You don't need to have an answer for every one of these things. And I don't know whether what that's all about, but yeah, it's just brilliant in time as they are.
Yeah, I agree. And the like I say, the story isn't doesn't seem particularly imaginative. It doesn't seem particularly unique. I just think that it's told so well, and it
Yeah,
happens in like a world that for some reason people really enjoy, and it's a world that just seems to work really well because you've seen all these stories that have like magic in them before, but they've not hit in the phenomenal way that Harry Potter did. There must be something truly special about the world, and I think it does start to fall down when you look at things like the systems that she set up and the deeper implications. Like when we think about them in the way we like to think about them in terms of
hmm
like a magic system, we like to go a bit deeper. We like to understand how things work, which I don't think a lot of people need. And I think
yeah,
it's one of the things that the franchise it kind of asks you to gloss over in order to enjoy it. And I'm kind of quite happy to do it. And the reason that I hate when J K Rowling goes and does spin-offs or she explains things in more detail and then fucks it up even more is because the things that happen in the books that don't make any sense or that people come up with questions, like I'll like reason them out in my mind.
right,
Like see,
exactly, yeah,
like Liquid Luck, I've kind of came to the conclusion. I'm like, yep, it's super hard to make. Only a couple of wizards can do it, and you can only really drink it once. Otherwise, it has like really detrimental effects. And I'm like happy with that conclusion. Like I've like come to that, and I'm like okay. And the Killing Curse, I'm like, yeah, only notoriously evil people can do it, and only the people that are evil side with Voldemort. I'm
hmm
like happy with that. I'm like I'm fine just to leave it at that. And when she keeps on going, that's kind of ruins it. So
yeah.
I think that's the kind of falling down point of the franchise for me. I think.
Yeah, I see where you come from. It's like it's a pitfall of all soft magic systems, and like when I talk about soft magic systems, I don't mean like I do not at all mean that they're like inferior to having rules. You know, like they can work. Like for instance, Lord of the Rings is an extremely soft magic system, and it's like amazing. You know, but it's the problem I have is when like Jake in the books, they'll imply there are rules that are in some situations, but then they like fall apart in other situations, and that's the only drawback. But you're right enough. Like most of the time, it's minor enough. You are not watching Harry Potter to read about a high level magic system. You're watching Harry Potter to read about school kids, you know, in a magic world. That's the difference. So you're not signing up for that. So it's fine. You know, it's like it's a nitpick that I enjoy nitpicking, but it's not. You know, it does not at all compromise the quality of these. I don't think.
Yeah, Harry Potter's great. We gotta watch the movies now. We gotta do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's gonna be fucking good. I'm looking forward to that already. Actually.